Great, thank you everybody for waiting. We're going to get started right at 11 o'clock or 2 o'clock, thanks. Or 1 o'clock, or wherever you are.
Top of the hour.
Wherever you
At
are.
the top of the hour, wherever you are. We're super happy to have everybody here. I do have people in the waiting room, so I think it's okay for us to let people in.
Sounds good. I'll start letting people in.
Okay, it looks like it's the top of the hour, so we're gonna get going here. Hello, everyone. I'm Dawn Valadez. I'm the Director of Youth and Artistic Development at BAVC Media. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. I am a light-skinned Chicana with silver hair. I'm also wearing a printed black on white top, and I have a rainbow BAVC Media logo background behind us. And I'm going to be the greeter, welcomer, and MC for the day. And we're super, super happy to have everyone here. I can see that people are still coming into the room, but we're going to get going because we have a very tight and incredible agenda for all of you, with some incredible participants who are going to be sharing, panelists who are going to be sharing some really amazing work. We, BAVC Media and the NEA, are excited to launch this new iteration of this important field building, these important field building convenings. The Independent Film and Media Arts Field Building Initiative is a collaborative partnership between the National Endowment for the Arts and BAVC Media, focused on creating a space for knowledge exchange and relationship building, with an emphasis on promoting regional networks, equity, and career sustainability for individuals working in the film and media arts industry. Thank you so much to the leadership of the teams at the NEA and at Sundance for laying the groundwork last year. And thank you to everyone who contributed ideas to the creation of this group and to the Independent Field and Media Field Briefing. BAVC Media is honored to continue this work with all of you. The work of IMAG is critically important at this juncture in our history as independent media artists and media organizations. We are often at the front lines of sharing stories that are not being picked up by the mainstream media. With the WGA and the SAG-AFTRA strikes, the consolidation of media platforms, and the increasing presence of AI across all mediums, the combination of our independence and our solidarity together is our strength. We represent the building blocks to the industry. We grow and support makers, we create pathways for careers, and we share new stories. I feel very optimistic about our ability to work together and support each other in these efforts. And before I turn this over to Jax DeLuca, I just want to say this is the first time BAVC is doing this. We're doing this at KQED. Thank you so much. And we may have some technical things that come up. So we just want to give each other, all of ourselves, grace during this process. And Jax, why don't you share some of your wisdom with us today.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It is so great to see all of your faces. It has been way too long, and we've been so eager to have this meeting and to get back together and get back into the swing of things. So happy summer to all. My name is Jax DeLuca, and I am the Media Arts Director at the National Endowment for the Arts. My pronouns are she, her, and I have olive skin and long dark hair. Since we do have such a packed lineup, I will keep this short, and my role is really to provide some background context for the theme of today's meeting, which is focused on investing in regional initiatives. So I thought it might be fun to just start off with a brief interactive exercise. So I'm sure at this point, many of you are familiar where to find the thumbs up button. But if you cannot find the thumbs up button, you can just give a thumbs up because it feels good. So give a thumbs up if you feel that local film and media arts communities are comprised of small businesses, nonprofits, and freelancers, which are an essential part of the creative economy. Great, I'm seeing some thumbs up. All right. Now give a thumbs up if you believe that local film and media arts communities are a driver of innovation in the $192 billion US film industry. All right. Give a thumbs up if you feel that local film and media arts communities are a talent incubator and a source of innovation. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up. Hello, everyone at the Hyphen Film Center. That's what's on my screen right now. All right, give a thumbs up if you feel that local film and media arts communities are essential to promoting voices vital to the health of our democracy. Awesome. I am seeing so many thumbs up. That is great. So what's exciting is these are all excerpts from the NEA Independent Film and Media Arts Briefing from 2022, which we released in collaboration with Sundance Institute through this initiative. And this is a briefing that, just for a few shout outs, it was written and researched by our colleague, Maggie Bowman, with the participation of Carrie Lozano, who is now the president and CEO of ITVS. Yay, Carrie. And also dozens of individuals through these field meetings and through individual conversations. So we aspire through this IMAG network is to really think about how your local film and media arts communities fits into this big picture of these talking points. And I can't tell you how important it is to really think about our role within the larger entertainment sector. And so, as Dawn mentioned, this field really is the building blocks of the industry. So the reason why we built the theme around regional initiatives is to really uplift the ways that local community-based film and media arts organizations and networks work together. And each of you do this in a variety of ways. So relating this meeting to the briefing, we're deliberate in shaping the framework of the briefing to help give you that language and to also give you the tools that you need to build and strengthen your own local film and media arts community. And I can't tell you how important it is to think about how that language that I just presented in those slides that many of you agreed with, that language is so critical to just keep reminding ourselves, because this field is bigger than how it feels sometimes. And also, when we're talking to people outside of the field, in particular decision makers or policy makers, we should always start with the basic details and the locally relevant facts that help demystify your local film and media arts community. And also, it's really important to start with the basics to help demonstrate your specific role within that and the ties that you have to the national ecosystem. So during that last IMAG meeting we had several months ago, there were many requests from those in this network to think about how we relate trainings and future sessions around the report that we put out last year. And so that's kind of where this the framework for today's session sprouted from. So we're really excited for the lineup of presenters and to build upon those themes in the briefing. So we're really covering models that are out in the field to develop stronger partnerships with local film offices. We're talking about statewide film studies and how to become federally registered apprenticeship programs. So we hope that there's a lot of learning and teaching and opportunities for mentorship between each other, because this is a space for learning. And I think that's really all that I have to say. In the chat, we can drop a link to the briefing in there, but also I would love to hear if any of you have already used the briefing to help further and advance anything in your region regarding local film and media arts communities. So if there's any success stories, please let us know. And I'm so happy to pass this back over to our co-host for today. And that would be either Dawn or Brittany.
Yeah, that's me. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Thanks for that framing, Jax. I really appreciate it. I feel like that's the work that we've done to make this meeting today. So thank you so much. And for all of the hard work everybody has put into this for the last year and a half or almost 2 years, right? I have a couple of things to do, and then I'll pass it to Brittany to do some housekeeping. We at BAVC and many places around the country know that it's very important for us to do a land acknowledgement, and we've adapted this one from the San Francisco Library. So let me do this, and then we encourage and invite people to do their own land acknowledgements in the chat. So at BAVC Media, we acknowledge that we occupy the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the original inhabitants of San Francisco's peninsula. As the indigenous protectors of this land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, or forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place. We recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. And as uninvited guests, we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples and wish to pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and the relatives of the Ramaytush community who may be on this call with us today. Please add the names of the peoples and nations whose land you are on, if you know them. And if you don't know them, we are putting a link in the chat for how to identify them and also how to support Indigenous people in your regions. We believe that land acknowledgements only go so far, and that action really is what demonstrates our care and concern. I live in Oakland, and I support the Lisan Ohlone people through the Sogorea Land Trust, and I pay my Shumai land tax. I recommend that you find other groups in your own communities. We also want to acknowledge that the recent climate-related tragedies in Maui, and that our hearts grieve with the loss of our brothers and sisters and with the loss of Indigenous lands and Indigenous documents, artifacts, information. We encourage you to support Native Hawaiians in their call for action and support. And we know that we've got some folks from Hawaii who are on this call today. So if there's anything that you'd like to share in the chat, we would love that. Additionally, we want to remember a person who was part of our community, their legacy continues to be part of our legacy in independent media. Jess Search, who was the co-founder of Good Pitch, recently passed away, and it's a huge loss to our community. I met Jess Search at the Latino Good Pitch in Barranquilla, Colombia. And she was a fierce leader of independent media. She coached me personally to help me find my voice and help my work progress. Her death is a huge loss to our community. We've added a remembrance video from the Skoll Forum in the chat. And so for a moment, we can think about that. And if there's any other people or things that you'd like to mention in terms of remembrance, please do so in the chat. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Here, I'm gonna share my screen really quick for a few brief housekeeping notes. Thank you all for being here. Please take a moment to change your name in Zoom to include your name, any organization you might be representing, and your pronouns. And if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat with your name, the name of your organization, and your location. And please add your land acknowledgement, including land back actions in your region if you know them. You can continue to use the chat throughout the day to engage with your fellow community members, but if you have a question that is intended for the panelists, please use the Q&A function and we will surface those questions for the moderators. Oh, sorry. We appreciate your presence today. Please take care of yourself and take breaks as needed. This meeting is being recorded, but we ask that you keep your cameras on as much as possible if you're able to and you feel comfortable with it. We love to see your faces, and this is part of why we have this type of meeting, so we all feel engaged with the larger community. This is a 3-hour meeting. It will go quite fast though, so we'll need to stay on schedule and we're going to gently let people know when their time is up. Please have grace with yourself and others. We're human and mistakes are normal. And we're excited for our presenters today. Take it away, Don.
Hi again. So we, Brittany put the agenda in the chat, but we can do that again so you can see. And our first group we're very excited about is developing a regional or state film and media strategy that is collaborative and responsive. And our first group speaking is coming from the beautiful state of Colorado. And I believe Michael Seaman is our moderator for that group. Michael, are you on board?
Hello. Okay, I got on.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Seaman from Colorado State University. I'm the director of the Arts Management Program and the co-author of a few for the Colorado Film Study. He, him, and the land acknowledgement is the Ute Indians. And I'm here to moderate our conference. So I have a few questions. We have the co-authors and a representative from the state of Colorado to talk about our film study. The first question would be to Lisa, a good goddess from Denver Arts and Venues. The Colorado Film Study is a unique project when one considers everyone that was involved, the partnerships that drove it. Who was involved with the study? Was it hard to form these partnerships? And how did the partnerships provide for a robust outcome? Perhaps she needs to be unmuted as well.
Okay, here we go. Hi, everybody. As mentioned, technical, we got this. Nice to see everyone. Thank you so much for gathering us. I feel so grateful to be in the room with all of these amazing humans. I'm Lisa Gaudes. I work for the city of Denver for the last 13 and a half years. My charge has really been supporting the creative industries across the city of Denver with Denver Arts and Venues, as Michael mentioned. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman with dark brown hair, glasses, black shirt, and a white blazer on today. Thank you, Michael and team. So I'll jump in to answer that. We just released the Colorado Film Study back in February of this year. And as I mentioned, I'm with the city of Denver, but everything I've done has been strategic to include the whole state of Colorado. We do have the Colorado Creative Industries State Office. So a lot of the work we do when we think about creative industries, we think statewide. So prior to this, we had done a music strategy and study, and we kept hearing from our community how they wanted something similar for film. And the community was really the advocate behind this. This wasn't a top-down approach. So right away, they are the partner that comes in and makes suggestions to where they want to head. So with that, we gathered a team, which includes John, who is on this panel, Lauren McCoon, who is also a filmmaker. They both have history in the film industry for years, and we're very good representatives for this statewide strategy to get into the community. They did over 150 interviews with our community across the state. And I think when you go into something like this, your community becomes your partner. You're building authentic relationships. You're hearing on the ground real data of what's actually going on. And I think it was also important, and I should say Michael here was our lead data researcher on that project. So coming together and meditating on our findings was crucial. And to back way out, even in the very beginning, helping each other define what film meant. What does that mean when we say film? And there's a lot of ways we could go with it, and we never want to leave anyone out. But when it came to Colorado, we focused on television production, commercial video production, ad agencies, documentary filmmaking, scripted filmmaking, experimental and animated short filmmaking, exhibitions, which could be movie theaters and music festivals. Some of our city and state agencies had relevant film and media programs going on. Of course, education in film and media, high school and college, and then video game production. So then you start to formulate who's coming to the table and who's going to help paint the picture. We didn't know what we didn't know then, obviously, and just really getting a baseline of who's out there, how many are out there, and what's the temperament on the ground. And then on the data tool side, another partner was with the Western States Arts Federation, otherwise known as WestStaff, who provided us the CV Suite tool. And that data was sourced from Lightcast, which includes, Bureau of Labor Statistics and Economic Analysis, US Census, and other city and state and federal organizations' data. So that collectively became our partnerships. But it was really the community at the end of the day that helped lead the discussion, helped lead this, what to me is an advocacy piece. This isn't a strategy. It's just a really good starting point to give a voice to our film community across Colorado.
I believe Michael is muted again.
Okay, thank you, host, for allowing me to be unmuted. Turning this, we have a lot of partnerships that were involved with this, which was fantastic. Now, the actual study itself, though, was also a very different focus than most. And I'm curious about this with John Van Wyck. John, many film studies focus solely on film incentives to the exclusion of everything else. How did the Colorado film study differ from this focus? And what were some of the areas you highlighted that may not have been in other studies? And what were some of the results that you found that actually informed the suggestions of the study?
Sure. First, my name is John Van Wyck. I'm the executive director of the filmmaking nonprofit Cinefe in Denver, which aims to identify and support and celebrate underrepresented voices in Colorado. We're on the land of the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, and the Ute Mountain Ute, among many others. I was one of the researchers and authors of the Colorado Film Study. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a white man in his late 30s with brown hair and a beard and glasses, and I'm wearing a light blue t-shirt today, or a button-up t-shirt. So to answer your question, Michael, conversations about film incentives, they have an all or nothing quality to them often. Often to the exclusion, as you said, of other ideas that could be helpful to artists and filmmakers, and to the exclusion of those very filmmakers' experiences and perspectives and needs and wants and desires and ideas. So this phenomenon can also be true in studies. And part of why that is because it's really tempting to just start with the economic data and to write a report on what those numbers are telling you. And if you're using quotes from interviews from the filmmakers, it's often just whatever is supporting the story you've already decided to tell, right? But we wanted our filmmakers and media artists and professionals in Colorado to be the central focus of the study. So instead of starting with an analysis of film incentives or with jobs and revenue data, we chose to begin instead with interviews with the filmmakers and the media artists themselves, particularly those whose voices are most often overlooked and ignored. And then using what we learned from those conversations, we could inform both the shape and the thesis of the study. It literally changed the questions we were asking and changed what success meant for the study, what we wanted out of it. And so one example of what that bottom-up approach gave us, that grassroots approach, was this idea of a visibility campaign, like a Made in Colorado icon or badge that would give Coloradans the chance to buy media locally and give our media artists and filmmakers the opportunity to be proud of being based in Colorado, while bringing visibility to the industry, which makes things like fighting for more incentives easier, right? But a more significant result of putting filmmakers at the center of the study was that the filmmakers said they felt included, they felt represented in the study. And as a result, they were more excited about its release, they were more excited about its findings, and they were more eager to take the study, to take its recommendations, and to begin building new programs and initiatives because they felt reflected and represented in that study. So that's the short to medium answer.
Yeah, great. One thing I was fascinated by is you looked outside of the state. So many studies are very inward focused and analysis and such, but you actually looked at programs in other states and what was working, what didn't. Did you, and anyone can answer this, did you find anything that really worked in another state where you thought, oh yeah, that's it, we need to think about this?
Yeah, as a state with relatively low and not very stable incentive levels compared to other states, we were especially interested in talking to community leaders and advocates in states that also did not have robust incentives, but who had nonetheless built some programmatic and physical infrastructure for their artists and who were running programs that supported their filmmakers. And that was one of the key differences we saw between states. There was a ton of variety, but if I'm working at a Netflix or a Hulu, and I say, okay, it's time that we start paying attention to regional and local filmmakers, and I arrive and I ask for names of filmmakers of different types and specialties and forms of expertise, who do I talk to, right? Is there an entity or an organization who's accountable for identifying and supporting those voices, and who's ready to advocate on their behalf? And that's something that we don't need incentives to do. So that was a key takeaway from talking to a lot of states, was that many of them took the initiative to say, hell or high water, and no matter what, we're going to work hard to look after our artists and be responsible for them, and to be a mouthpiece for them. And so that was one. And then Lisa might be able to speak. I think she can speak a lot more intelligently about the other difference that we saw, which was there were differences in the types of partnerships people had at municipal and state levels between the nonprofit sector and those municipal and state levels and the for-profit sector. And so how many connections do you have? Who are the nodes on that connective network? And how much ongoing cooperation is there? Meaning, is there a shared sense of success, or are there forms of partnership between those different types of entities where there's a shared understanding of what we're all trying to get, what we're all trying to do, And are there ways of advancing all of our missions together? So there are states where with really robust and tight municipal and state partnership and cooperation when it comes to media arts, and where nonprofits are upheld as part of that ecosystem. And then there are, I think all of us would love to see more progress, and we see a lot of opportunity for more progress.
Yeah, and going back to the partnership situation, the idea of a city and a state working together, looking at both the rural regions of your state, which film industry is certainly involved with, as well as the urban situation. I guess my question with for Ariel and Lisa is, how hard is it, and is it worth the added bureaucracy of partnering to do a study like this? Curious about.
Absolutely. I'll jump in first. It's always worth it because there's room for improvement. I'm Ariel. I'm the Deputy Film Commissioner for the state of Colorado. I'm a Caucasian female. I go by she, her. I have red hair and a green shirt and a blurry Enterprise spaceship in the background. And it's a pleasure to be here today. The point of having state agencies like the Colorado Office of Film, Television, and Media is to improve enterprise for the stakeholders that we represent. So being able to utilize the study that was created has been highly beneficial for our office in terms of figuring out areas that need improvement from our state perspective. About 66% of programs, be it video games, feature films, television shows, other media enterprises that pass through our state incentive program, film rurally. So there is a significant amount of work going on in the rural regions of our state. Most of the larger nonprofits are in our urban areas. Most of our universities are in our urban areas. Most of the pipelines that exist are in our urban areas. So as the state, one adjustment that we've made is looking at ways to better partner urban resources with rural areas that are not receiving the same level of equity or access that other areas of the state are. And a study like this is a fantastic way to be able to isolate, like John said, areas of growth and better ways to find partnerships and proceed. Lisa, I apologize that I jumped in.
Are you kidding? That's perfect. That's perfect. I think it's great that Ariel's here representing the Film Commissioner's Office, because when we look at other states and the robust work they're doing in incentives, we've struggled a little bit. We don't have as much money as Georgia and other places. But I think it was so important for us to really, really shine a light on our community, and that had been lacking, so whether it was in your urban core along the Front Range, that's fine, but there's so much talent out there across the state. And as we were building a kind of coalition, and John and Lauren were helping to develop sort of a committee at the same time, and be really strategic about diversity, equity, inclusion, access, and hear from people that really had something to say about not feeling included, or just, I think the main word that came out of this was siloed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that we're very different than maybe other states when it comes to that. So this stepping stone of a study was really to start to glue these pieces together a bit and shine a light for the whole state and for our offices to go, okay, we have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to do. And I know Ariel's team too is working on more strategic programming, grant giving, and other ways to support and uproot that. Ariel, I don't know if you want to speak to some of that as well.
Thank you so much. My background is arts education and advocacy, as well as film production. So being in this position and helping steer the conversation along with the wonderful colleagues that I'm able to share the spotlight with today, to include more workforce development programs, help reinforce these career pathway connections, create more sustainable local industry. I'm sure, as almost everybody on this call is aware, we are in an unprecedented time when it comes to filmmaking. I mean, the access to make professional content and distribute it is unlike anything that has occurred previously. And something to highlight is during the strike situation, the potential for independent media to secure a wider platform is really exciting, because there's going to be this need to fill that pipeline for those projects to be distributed. So one thing that we are looking at, and that the study did highlight, is this need to help create those sustainable pathways, and this need to create those sustainable partnerships and community relationships, and break down the silos that are existent here in Colorado. I will say our incentive situation is relatively unique compared to other states. We have this wonderful thing called Tabor, which has been very limiting in terms of securing sustainable larger film incentives. So I do believe that is a unique situation in our state compared to others, and incentives to help drive economic flow in terms of sustainable production and helping reinforce some of these pathways. But the unprecedented opportunity that faces us all is this growing industry and this access for media makers and content creators to get their work out there and have a sustainable living with tools that were unavailable 10 or 15 years ago. So it's an exciting opportunity to figure out ways that we can collectively support rural and urban and increase access to these successful career pathways.
Michael, I actually wanted to jump in just for a second. You do have questions in the Q&A, but go ahead, Lisa. Why don't you finish your thought and then let me know when you're ready for me to ask the question.
Sure. I was just gonna compliment the moment and say, with Michael's data that he was able to find, which was a good swath of time. It was 2011 to 2019, so pre-pandemic. Colorado's film growth rate was twice that of the traditional film industry powerhouses in our bigger states like California and New York. We had $1 billion in sales of goods and services. We had 15,000 Colorado workers in the film industry in that slice. And the other thing we did, thank you, Michael, again, was look at the impact of COVID, because what an interesting moment we had to go, okay, we have that data, but then what happened between 2019 and 2021? And we saw a loss of 4,000 jobs and 440 million in money. So just being able to see and comprehend those changes and shifts based on that alone was really wild. But going back to the growth, Colorado's film and media industry is large and robust and growing, and especially in the commercial and video area primarily.
Yes, and for those out there that are considering doing a study like this, I encourage you to reach out to your local university. There's people like me all over the country that have access to this kind of data that are more than happy to work on a project like this, because it's that lived experience. So I highly suggest that. And I guess if we have questions, we should go that route.
Great. There's a few questions in here. Obviously, what an amazing study and great, just what a great case study and example. Some of the questions I'll kind of combine a couple. One was, how did you find participants for your study? And I guess connected to that, in the outreach and interview team, were the outreach and interview teams as diverse as the study participants? And if not, how did you mitigate the likelihood that people from historically underrepresented communities might shy away from participating in this. So let's start with that. And then I have another question that we can ask.
Yeah. Lisa, are you okay with me taking a first crack? Cool. So you have organizations in Colorado that are like membership organizations. They host networking events, workshops, and so forth. We started with those and we looked at the diversity within those organizations. And we saw that there was, I think the euphemism would be a lot of opportunity for better representation from others in the state. And there were not necessarily really visible film organizations dedicated to BIPOC, LGBTQ filmmakers with disabilities. And so what we did was we reached out to organizations who serve those communities, particularly in the arts. And sure enough, they started, I mean, we formed relationships and partnerships with them, but they began providing a really steady stream of incredible folks, many of whom had been making films for years and were not part of what I would consider sort of Colorado's institutional and visible and mainstream kind of film community. And it was through those conversations, the conversations with those individuals who we then built relationships with, that we learned the most and that had the greatest impact on the study. I think one of the things we would do differently would be to maintain some institutional memory across the project. The study was obviously, as everyone else was, heavily disrupted and heavily impacted by COVID. So we had team members who were suddenly not available or furloughed or unable to respond and for long periods of time. In an ideal scenario, you're building an advisory council of some kind, a steering committee of some kind, because we're studying 10 different sectors, and we might have people who provide you with unbelievable expertise and connections to folks on the ground in something like commercial video production. But you might not have yet talked to any of the video game production companies or the film schools or people who work in exhibition or in scripted film. And having a diverse, experienced council with strong relationships to communities across the state who could have provided feedback throughout the process would have been enormously useful. Obviously, when you're building out a team, the more people you add, the slower it's going to go. And as I said, we were already constrained by what circumstantially was happening with COVID. But in the final stages of the project, we did share the report, share drafts of the study privately with members of the community for precisely that feedback. And once again, it was extraordinarily helpful.
Great,
Lisa?
thank you. Yeah, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Lisa.
Raising her hand. She has to be unmuted, I think. Yeah.
I get it now. I should just not mute myself. Got it. Yeah, I just want to compliment John's point too about slow. You know, sure there was COVID going on, but when doing this, the rule of thumb in my mind is do it the best you can. So if it takes more time and it means more people are at the table and you're really getting into the guts of our communities, then take the time. Do not rush these things. Do not try to get them out as quickly as possible. Do not check these as boxes.
Great. Are there any more questions we should address?
Well, we kind of are out of time because we'd like to move on to the next one, but I can kind of consolidate a few of these. I think the general question was like, how do you get your state to be fully committed to participating in this? And connected to that is looking at tribal communities and you know, how are you connecting that? And maybe just if we could close with that question. And I apologize for not being specific to each of these questions, but that's sort of what the general question was.
That's part of the project is that it's unending, but that doesn't mean we can't hold ourselves accountable every step of the way, right? And so Ariel at the film office has done extraordinary work in building and running programs with and alongside our tribal communities around the state. And within Denver, however, if I'm interacting with leaders within the Asian American Pacific Islander artistic community, meeting them where they are and finding out what's exciting to them and what's meaningful to them is a very different conversation than when I'm interacting with Denver's West Side Chicano community and what role filmmaking plays for them. And so part of this is community organizing and community building over time. There's not a finish line for it, but there are ways to measure it so that we can hold ourselves accountable, so that each year we have stronger relationships with these communities and they feel and are more included and have more ownership and more leadership on initiatives like these than they were the year before. Those things are measurable, and those are the things that I feel we're responsible for.
One final button, if I can add, is generally, you know, specific to my experience in film, there's still a lack of representation, right? There's still this barrier for underrepresented groups to be involved in meaningful roles on a given project or on, you know, the industry scale. So having opportunities for dialogue to occur and being able to have spaces for underrepresented groups to come to the table and voice their needs is going to be highly effective. And that comes back to John's point of creating those spaces, creating those relationships and bridges to build. But the best thing to do to make space at the table is to make space at the table.
Well, thank you. That's all the time we have. Thank you for kicking it off, and thank you for managing our tech challenges and just giving an incredible example that I think everyone on this call is really digging into. There is a lot, you know, so thanks so much. We're going to move to the next developing a regional and state film media strategy with the beautiful state of Washington. And our moderator is V. Hua. And then our guests, our panelists are Amy Lillard and Kate Beckert. And I'm just going to ask that you all unmute yourself. And we'll help with that. But go ahead and take it away, V.
Hey everyone, nice to see some familiar faces in here. My name is Vi Hua. I use they, them pronouns. I'm from Seattle, which Amy and Kate also are in, which is Duwamish and Coast Salish tribal lands. I'm an Asian American femme presenting non-binary filmmaker, arts administrator, and journalist, working for a number of nonprofits. Excited to talk with Amy and Kate today about Washington State. There's some parallels with Colorado for sure, including we have conducted similar studies here. Which have led to some changes in the industry. And I met them while I was executive director of the film nonprofit Northwest Film Forum, where I'm still a mentor. So I'm excited to speak to you all about sort of all levels of filmmaking in Washington. I think Amy's unmuted and Kate's still muted, so I'm going to call on Amy first.
Okay. Thanks for letting us be here. My name is Amy Lillard. I am the executive director of two nonprofit organizations that support the creative economy. One is Washington Filmworks and the other is WhipSmart. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a blonde-haired, green-eyed girl with glasses, and I am sitting in my living room and my dog's around, so you may hear them. So with that, I'll pass it to Kate.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Becker. I'm the Creative Economy Director in King County, which is located in Seattle, Washington. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Caucasian woman with red hair. I have a blue and white flowered shirt on and light skin, and I have a blurred background, so you're not missing anything there. And I'm in Seattle, King County, a land of the Coast Salish people.
All right, cool. Let's kick it off with just talking a little bit about the film landscape in Seattle, King County, and Washington State.
We have had our challenges, that's for sure. Amy has been at this much longer than I have. I've only been doing this for a decade. Amy has been here much longer than me. Amy, take it away on our film landscape. What do we want to share?
Well, I would say that I've been here for 16 years, so I've seen quite a few things in the history of our work. And, you know, we started our work in Washington State as the 6th incentive in the country, and we keep talking about these incentives. And after having a very small incentive for a very long time, it was just increased significantly. And with that legislation, we really worked to address and adopt new policies in that law to change the film industry in Washington State, which we can talk about in more detail. But, you know, we have 2 production centers in the state of Washington, which is unique, I would say, in some ways. We have the east side of the state with Spokane. And then, of course, Kate's going to talk now about King County and the Seattle area.
Great. So prior to being at King County, I had the honor of running the Seattle office of film and music for a little over 5 years, and then transitioned on to the county. And one of my motives in doing that was that I knew the executive at King County was ready to go with film. We'd been talking about it for years. And I decided to switch teams. And it's been really great. And the reason I'm making that point is because having that political champion is really one of the levers we have been moving forward with that in King County. And one of our big initiatives has been to establish a soundstage. We had for a long time in Washington, we haven't had an accessible large-scale soundstage. So we have public investment in a soundstage now known as Harbor Island Studios. And that is one of the initiatives we're moving forward with to really help grow the film economy and culture here. It has been challenging. It is an expensive region to live in, Seattle and King County, and being in the gig economy and making film, not the easiest way to make a living here. So both Amy, I, and V, and many others have worked for years to try to uplift our ecosystem here, make sure that there are opportunities, facilities, and support for folks working in film.
Indeed. So let's talk about some challenges and solutions. So as you all know, I'm big on equity. So I definitely want to throw that in the mix. Like, how are we creating spaces for folks who have been underserved in media? But also just some other solutions you all have been working on that you want to share.
Sure. So that's what I was alluding to when I was talking about the bill that passed in Olympia is I don't remember who the speaker was from Colorado, but we spent a lot of time in community, and we are a statewide organization as well, listening to people from underrepresented communities about what they need and what they to succeed and how we get there. And so working with the information that we gathered, we have implemented several things within the equity space in the law. So we now have workforce development dollars of $750,000 a year to very specifically support people from underrepresented communities. And that comes in 2 different forms. One is we heard that they wanted support in the above the line space, so directors and producers and writers. And then in addition, they wanted some specific training around below the line. So, you know, costume designers and grip and electric and those kinds of things. And so we're really approaching, you know, trying to change film sets in Washington State from both equations. What we know for sure is if you have a person of color, say, making a film, they're bringing the people that they know from their communities to work on that. And so we just launched our new Above the Line program, which is like the first component of it is it's an education component. And we're going to train them in how to build a budget, how to market their project, how to, you know, pitch to get financing, all the basics that you need. 30 folks will go into that program. And then after they graduate from that program, if you will, they can apply for one of 5 mentorships with a mentor in Washington to talk about how to film in Washington, and then also a mentor out of a production center like Los Angeles or New York, so that they can help with financing and finding talent for their projects and, you know, distribution. So we're launching that program right now. But again, just going back to where we started, everything is rooted in community. And it's not just our production centers, but it's rural locations like Yakima, and you know, 30 out of 39 counties in Washington are rural. So we've been all over the state of late.
How about you, Kate?
What was the question, V? It was around what we're doing to help diversify our industry and center equity, right?
I mean, that's one of the main challenges. Obviously, this is a challenge biggest on my mind, but other challenges that you're helping to solve too that you might want to share a solution.
Oh, okay. Well, that is definitely a challenge, but it is, I want to say this, it's an exciting time in our regional film industry statewide. You heard the wonderful things Amy was just talking about. And we have sort of a collective momentum going that has some real gravity around it right now, with a whole lot of people pulling in the same direction. And it feels like our film sector in Washington is more hopeful now than it has been for a long time. And it's really a good feeling because we've been pushing boulders up hills for a long time, trying to get some traction and some support of the caliber that we need. And finally, it feels like some good things are happening. So it's really an exciting time. So we have a number of initiatives going on in King County, but I mentioned the one that is our sort of the crown jewel of what we're doing. And it's a place where we identified there's really a gap here and no one else is focused on this space. And that was creating production space that is accessible to folks. We have a lot of small stages throughout the Seattle area. We didn't have a grand stage. In fact, the last time, it's a little bit embarrassing, but the last time we had a major sound stage in the state of Washington was when Northern Exposure wrapped up and left in 1995. So there's really been a facility and infrastructure need in the state since then. So King County had a giant warehouse, 117,000 square feet, that wasn't being used effectively. And so we organized, we brought together the film industry, we brought together folks who had worked on sound stages in other markets to be our advisor. And we have a 15-person advisory team that has consulted with us on this because government should not build sound stages or do big film initiatives without the industry involved, obviously. So we've got them at the table with us and we've moved forward on this. Right now, there's an indie film feature in there with 40 people working today and through the end of the month. We've had a few big productions in over the last couple of years, but it really was motivated also by the pandemic. We knew that there was a big production that Washington Filmworks was willing to incentivize.
I know.
That could put a couple of hundred people back to work during the pandemic. Yeah, what?
Oh, you lagged a little bit, but you're back.
Oh, thank you, V. Anyhow, push forward to make sure that folks could go to work during the pandemic in the scary pre-vaccine times when everybody was out of work. Big distance was needed, controllable space was needed, usual locations were not available because we were in that very scary time. And so that was a motive for driving forward on that too. And now we have really centered 4 things in the pricing scheme of that studio, which is local jobs, you hire in our locals. Are you doing the work to bring some folks who are not the usual suspects to the table? Diversity and equity are very important in the structure of the soundstage and how one accesses it and what they pay for it. Green filmmaking, we all know that thousands of water bottles get wasted on big sets. And next generation opportunities. So if you can explain how you are addressing those 4 things, local hires, local jobs, equity and diversity, green filmmaking, and next generation opportunities, the studio costs far, far less than it would if you don't address those things with me and with our film advisory board. And so some big productions have come in and said, we don't have time for that. And we have said, that's fine. We have a special price for you. So we really want to center those King County values in our pricing scheme so that folks can so that we can have access for all different scales of productions. That is really the goal.
So I want to follow up with a question Jax asked, which was sort of my follow-up to you all. So I'm on the Arts Commission. We work with the city a lot on different initiatives. You all have experience at the city, county, and state level. So how do we get people mobilized to create some of these changes in their own states, especially for states where support is less strong? How do we begin those conversations? How do we show our support? I can throw one in, for instance, some council members are open to championing these kinds of things. Talking to your council member is one option. What else? And who makes the decisions? Like, who do we need to bother?
Yeah, it's a great question.
A great question. I'd like to return about some of our other equity work later, but I'm very happy to talk about this. One of the things, you know, as Kate suggested, creative economy is having this incredible, you know, we have a statewide creative economy report being written right now. We run a second organization called Whip Smart, and we have some private funding to do mentorship for creative industry mentorships. Like, there's a lot of momentum, you know, the film incentive, this soundstage, there's a lot of momentum. And I think one of the keys was changing the conversation from, you know, from an arts economy to a creative economy. Like, we all believe in arts and culture. It is one side of, you know, a creative economy, but we really started talking about the economic impact of the work that we do. In Washington State, $10 billion of our GDP is generated by the creative industries, right? Instead of talking about we're the 47th, you know, 47th in the country for arts grant funding, let's talk about the $10 billion that we generate as an industry, right? We can use that as collateral. And I can't tell you, I would probably say, and Kate, tell me, like, at least half of my job is continually telling the story of why it's important to support creatives. Not only is it about the work we make and the great things we do for community, but it's about innovation, it's about future, and it's about jobs. And that has really helped in the way that we get positioned at the city, the county, and the state level, I think.
Yeah, I concur. And of course, storytelling is always at the center of filmmaking and very important, but making sure that people understand that this is real jobs, that surviving in a gig economy in an expensive environment is not easily done. And that, so the more they understand about that, the better. One of the things that has been really effective is getting folks out on set, bringing the political leaders and the decision makers out to see, because a lot of people, as lots of you know, have a mistaken impression of what the film industry is. It's very Hollywood in a lot of people's mind. And yet in reality, we all know that's only a small part of the film industry, and we're not very Hollywood in Washington right now. So making sure that people understand, who is this? This is our neighbors. These are my friends' kids. These are folks from our community doing this work. And these are the jobs I never thought about that are the behind the scene jobs. We hear that all the time, right? Because folks have this sometimes glamorous impression of the film industry, when really it's a workers issue. It is a workers industry, and creative workers need to be supported. And so getting our political leaders to understand that is essential, and firsthand view can be really helpful.
Something else I'll mention, and very specific to Jax's question about getting decision makers to invest in that workforce development. We had tried for years under the Washington Filmworks umbrella to get workforce development dollars, but because, as someone else alluded to earlier, you know, the majority of creative workers are what the state calls non-traditional. So gig workers, sole proprietors, independent contractors, and they do not show up in state data. And so that means when you go to the economic development places, they're like, why would we do this? It doesn't lead to actual jobs. Why would we invest in this industry? So getting your elected officials to understand the unique nature of our of the work that the creative industries do is super important. I'm going to drop in the chat. We did a study with the Department of Commerce around non-traditional workers and how the state could help us. And again, like, we got that money in the bill because we told them we couldn't get it any other way. So if you pull data, what we always say to elected officials is, you're only seeing what you can see. You know, another really, you know, in NAICS codes, which are inherently, you know, challenging. But the other part is, on a film set specifically, most people on a film set are employed by a payroll service company. That payroll service company does not come up in the film NAICS codes. So it comes in a service provider NAICS code. So all of those jobs are undercounted.
That's awesome. Yeah, and Jax dropped some creative economy data in the chat too, if people want to look at that. I also mentioned, like, the power of unions to support initiatives is pretty huge, as well as there are nonprofits that can lobby, or sorry, not nonprofits, organizations that can lobby alongside the city and county to help push it. So that might also be good things to explore. I want to get to Hyphen Film Center's question around Louisville having a soundstage in the works that's going to be completed soon. How do you ensure a soundstage is accessible and equitable at an early stage? What are initiatives, groups, government, individuals that can be championing at a community level?
Yeah, I think it's important to reach out and make sure that those folks are invited to the early conversations. And is Louisville actually supporting a soundstage? Oh my God, I can't wait to learn more about it. Thank you for noting that. But yeah, bringing the folks in who have the lived experience, who are trusted in their communities, who can share that information and help you devise how to make sure that it is equitable and accessible. It's not easily done. And so making sure that folks who really have the knowledge to inform that are at the table with you. That's my best suggestion. Anything you want to add? Yeah. Amy or B?
I would just say if you're inviting people like coming from a place of real relationship and taking the time to build the relationships that are authentic, because that, yeah. Amy, did you want to round back? And if anyone else has any questions, we have 10 more minutes. Round back to your sort of equity work you wanted to
I do. So in addition to the workforce development piece, we also, so if you're unfamiliar, incentives give you money back for what you spend in state. So whether that's working with local folks or, you know, local businesses, that's at the highest level, that's what they are. We are the first incentive in the country to give additional dollars back if you're telling the story of a historically underrepresented group. And so, you know, that is giving us a lot of traction in a lot of different ways. I think that Hollywood, all due respect and love, keeps saying that they want to make these big changes. And we're in an environment, you know, in Washington State that is motivated to make these changes happen. And so there's a tremendous amount of responsibility in doing this enhanced incentive. And like the inspiring part for us is we're already hearing from many film commissioners who are like, do these two things right, and we'll follow suit. So it gives us hope that change is coming in the industry. Although I will say it's an interesting time to be having this conversation given some recent Supreme Court issues. But if you're interested in, you know, having a conversation about how you do that in your state or jurisdiction, I'm so happy to help because I've talked to many lawyers and many members of the community and many elected officials. And I think we got smart enough to get it done. I know we got smart enough to get it done. Now we just have to make sure it sticks. So I'll ask a question while V waits to be unmuted, which is Kate, can you talk about the important role that the EFAB, which is your advisory board, plays and how that was populated and what they do?
Sure. Contrary to our usual process, when we put together an advisory group, we try to make sure everyone's at the table. Young people, people from underrepresented communities, folks, immigrants, refugees, everyone at the table. That is not what we did in this particular instance because we were building a soundstage and needed folks who had worked on large sound stages with that intel. So while it is a diverse group, it's not an age diverse group. It's folks who are mid or further along in their career who have worked in other markets, and that was by design. We needed soundstage intel on that team. Anyhow, we meet regularly. We used to meet weekly. Now we meet monthly, but they help with tours. They help with information. They have been absolutely a strong force for vetting all of our initiatives as we're moving them forward. When I need consultation on how to make a decision, that's who I go to first, is this group of 15 people who have been with us for 3 years now and have been really a trusted group of folks who are determined to work on behalf of the industry. it's worked out fantastically well. I can't tell you how happy I am to be working with what we call the EFAB, the Executives Film Advisory Board. And just mentioning here that our county council was not ready to move forward on having yet another commission. And we wanted to put this film advisory board into place. So we just got it done under the executive's authority, and it's called the EFAB, the Executives Film Advisory Board. Did I answer your question, Amy?
You did. You
Okay.
did.
Thank you.
All right, I got a couple more questions. I'm gonna try to power through them real quick. In the
Okay,
next-
go be.
All right. So Sean asked about, it's not a fully formed question, but is there support or a way to support dedicated broadcast licenses, cable channels, or production resources for tribes? Or how are you all working with tribes?
That is an area I am working on right now.
Thanks
That
for
you-
the answer.
That you are.
I am not working on that right now, Amy. Yeah.
It's interesting. We have, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it. Oh my God, yes, we are. I think that it's more of a public-private partnership. So it's about finding the right partners, with the tribe who have the technology to help. That's kind of where we're at right now. And I wish I could say more, but I can't. Well, it's not a very
Well,
satisfactory.
I'm excited to see how that develops though.
Yeah.
If we're not Hollywood and Washington, what are the jobs that are available? Since most are gigs, these are two separate questions. The second one is very hard. Since most are gigs, how do we navigate sustainability?
We have a very strong indie film scene in the state of Washington. It is very collaborative in many ways until the work gets really short. And then when there is not enough paid work for folks who are also working in the indie film scene where they may or may not be paid, that's when things get a little more competitive, people get a little more protective. But in general, we are very collaborative, and I am certain that as we move forward with this new golden moment in the state of having incentives and having a soundstage, and we also have a city film commission newly appointed in the city of Seattle, those three things come together to help address some of the many issues that folks have been challenged with. But there are lots of jobs in the indie film scene. They just might not be at union scale. Amy, what do you want to jump in on?
So I recently read a report from the NCLS, the National Convention of State Legislators, who didn't have so many nice things to say about the incentive, which I'll just leave that there. But what they did say is they talked about how a state can really maximize the economic impact of film and make, they didn't use this word sustainability, but we do some of these things. For example, they say invest in local filmmakers, right? So the more you invest, like when we first launched Washington Filmworks in 2007, we really spent a lot of time investing in our female directors and producers. And those folks, as they came up and they are now working, all over the globe, are, they come home to make projects when they can, and they hire local, and they are committed to being in Washington State, right? So we are doing the same thing with this new bill, which is called the Small Budget Production Initiative. We just are the first money in, which was pretty cool. It means you don't have to be fully funded to get money from us. 17 local projects, right? So we're investing not only for bringing the big budget stuff in, but we're also investing in our local community so that they want to come back, and they're bringing up people within the community with them. And that's one thing. The other thing that they talked about is diversifying outside of your production centers. So as I was talking about the historically underrepresented communities enhanced incentive, we are also talking about filming in rural. You get additional dollars if you film in rural Washington. So those are two things that we're doing to help create a more sustainable, like statewide film industry. And I'm going to go back in a couple of years with the industry and show the elected officials how it's working so well, and hopefully get more money.
So I think Kate dipped or dropped, but my last question, and sorry for folks who we can't get to your questions. What are some ways that individual filmmakers can connect with local filmmaking communities and get their projects made? So I'm just gonna say, talk to your local nonprofits that support film, because that is a really good route.
Mhm.
Facebook groups.
Go. Yeah, no, go.
Oh, I was gonna say Facebook groups as well.
Mhm. You know what and it's hard as a statewide organization, but I find our success is that don't ask the community to find you, you find them, right? So I spend a lot of time going out into community and going to their events. And, we are only so many people, we can only find so many things, but it keeps me excited, motivated, and inspired, right? But also, finding people in their own community, you learn and know more about them. And so that's what I would say.
Absolutely. Yep. Showing up and creating relationships is definitely the way.
100%.
Cool. We're right on time. So I'll hand it over to whoever. Thank you, Amy /
Thank
Kate.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you. That was amazing. So great. And I love the two state comparison here, just the variety of how people are addressing these challenges and the creativity, obviously big creativity in these rooms. So thank you so much. We're going to go to a quick lightning talk. We're very excited to do these. And then after the lightning talk, we'll have a bit of a break, but you can continue to look at the Zoom because there'll be some cool things happening on the Zoom, some shout outs from various organizations. We're going to invite Raymond Lachaud to come on board. He's with the city of San Francisco, and he's going to talk a little bit, very briefly, about digital equity. Thank you, Ray, for joining us.
Yeah, so thank you all. I love the spirit that kind of pervades this talk, and I really appreciate being able to share some information with you all today. My name again is Ray Lachaud. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm in the kind of houndstooth patterned polo with the black collar. And I'm the digital equity manager for the city and county of San Francisco. And today, please excuse me being so brief and succinct and concise with my presentation, but I just want to make sure that I'm respecting the time of everybody here and other presenters. So I can't see the screen. Is the presentation up?
Yes, it is.
Oh, yes,
and
sorry about that.
Yes, sorry about that. And yes, it is. And we're trying to put it into presentation mode. So just, but you can go. We can keep going. It's fine. Thank you so much for these slides.
No, my pleasure. It's a pleasure and a privilege. Just real quick. So I've been the digital equity manager for the city for about 2 years now. Background, I was actually managing workforce programs. And so the whole career path talk deeply resonates with me. And so today I just want to share some resources that I think can help you secure some other funding, help you think about some digital equity strategies, digital equity and inclusion strategies, and also create some advocacy around your work. So whenever we get ready, we can transition to the next slide. So I chose this resource. It's called Benton.org. So Benton is the Institute for Broadband and Society, because this is one of my favorite resources. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, I don't know if you can actually see the content, but it says subscribe in the upper right-hand corner. I'm not getting paid by Benton, so I'm not just promoting them. But I really am a big proponent of how they package the information they share. And really what they cover is all the different subsets of digital equity, right? So they talk about funding, they talk about policy, they talk about tools and resources and buzz. So you can stay informed. And I get all this information synthesized and broken down into bite-sized pieces that I can understand, because I know we all have, competing priorities and things that are, competing for our attention. And so I would say, if you're interested in getting information around digital equity initiatives, please take the time to subscribe to Benton. Next slide, please.
Great. And I'm alongside with you. So the next slide is up.
Okay, awesome. So this next slide is, this is a government body called the National Telecommunication and Information Administration. And they actually inform the office of the president, right? And they're an executive branch agency, like I said, responsible for advising the president. They work to ensure that all of us have access to advanced telecom and information services. But one of the biggest benefits that I saw when working with NTIA is they have these convenings and they cover different subsets of digital equity, right? And from different nationally, so you'll hear from rural areas, rural cities, you'll hear from major metro cities and everything in between, right? So they offer grant programs that can benefit organizations on this call and communities aiming to extend their digital reach. So one other big thing I want to point out when you go to their website is try to take advantage of their broadband availability and adoption guide. So because this is commonly overlooked, right? Because many cities or states, they have like GIS, geographic information systems, that map different areas. And one of the biggest challenges is accurate reporting for served or unserved areas. And so right now, the federal guideline for unserved areas is any area that's experiencing or enjoying, or lack thereof, 25 megabits per second download speeds and 3 megabits per second upload speeds. So if you're at or below that threshold, then you're considered unserved. And so with this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this later on in the presentation, is funding is being allocated according to what's being served and unserved, right? And so what that means is there's a lot of funding that came down from the federal government to the states to expand broadband in certain areas. Now, rural areas are getting the lion's share of the money, but I'll talk a little bit about that later. So I would highly recommend going to this website, and the resources will be shared here in just a moment. But I'm going to transition to the next slide if I can. Oh,
We got you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So in comparison to the NTIA, the NTIA is like the policy and kind of like the objective stuff, right? And NDIA is like the ethos of digital equity. You can go to NDIA and you talked a little bit about, someone mentioned like coalition building. They have resources for that. If you wanted a digital equity scorecard for your city to kind of rate the performance of agencies in your city or businesses in your city, you can get those resources here. They're a great organization to be affiliated with. And I would say also subscribe to their community as well. If we could transition to the next one.
And
please.
I'm so sorry to cut you off, but maybe this, can you wrap it up with this last slide? And we really meant it was lightning.
No. Please, yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And
So actually you can quick click, because I have the expanded version on the 6th slide.
Okay,
so
go to
everyone
the
can see
6th
it.
slide.
Yep. So
There
this is funding timeline. So I'm just giving you a perspective from California and how, when I talked about the funding from the feds to the states, this is the timeline. If you can progress to the next slide, and then we can wrap it up there so they can get a better view. So this is the timeline from the time that the state was communicating with the feds about money, and I think California got 1.8 billion. And this was the timeline from the time that they started planning, right? And during the planning process, so planning for the distribution of these funds, right? Who's supposed to get allocated what? Again, rural areas got the lion's share because there's little to no broadband development in those areas. And so urban areas really had to fight and advocate for funding for broadband expansion in major cities or cities. So one thing I'll say is advocacy is huge. If you're in the midst of planning now, various cities are at various stages of planning, make sure that your state or your city acknowledges covered populations and get input from marginalized, disenfranchised, and groups that are considered underserved and under-resourced. So that's older adults and adults with disabilities, BIPOC, you name it. And I know that's largely determined by the cities. And so with that, being respectful of the time here, I want to close there. And then if anybody wants to get in contact with me, please feel free to screenshot really quickly before we segue to the next person. And there's also some resources in the chat that I think can be really helpful, depending on where you are and what you do.
Great. Wow. Thank you. That was like a lot of information in a short period of time. We're not kidding about this being a lightning round, but
Oh, good.
that was really, really helpful. We really appreciate you, Ray. Thanks so much.
Merci.
Take
My
care.
pleasure.
Okay, just to transition out, we're going to take a 15-minute break. And in the meanwhile, there were things put into the chat for you all to have access to. And Brittany's going to show some really cool slides that'll be part of the shout outs that various people in this meeting shared with us. So take it away, Brittany, and see you back in 15 minutes. Hello, everyone. We're coming back into the room. I believe, this is Dawn again. I believe that we will give you access to all of these slides. So we're very excited that everybody shared such really cool stuff happening. Thanks so much. And I am going to pass this to Paula Smith Aragoni, who's going to be the moderator for this next group. And the title of this session is Strengthening Creative Workforce Initiatives. And we're really excited to hear from Wendy Levy, Bawin Sukchat, and Susan Malone. And I'll let everybody introduce themselves, but take it away, Paula.
Thanks so much, Dawn. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. As Dawn said, I'm Paula Smith Aragoni. I'm the executive director at BAVC Media. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white middle-aged woman. I have long blonde hair. I have a blue shirt on, and I'm sitting in front of a virtual background that looks like a rainbow. It's my pleasure to be here with this panel and to actually go kind of to more of a on the ground level for our media arts organizations and how we think about creative workforce development. It's wild that that is like such a buzzword right now, and we hear it everywhere with creative workforce development. And I know for a lot of us, that's what we've been doing for a long time. So it's great to have the opportunity to put it into context for organizations that are already doing different activities related to this work, and for others who are very interested into developing new strategies and just trying to understand what that means for your own organization. So again, we have a fantastic panel here, and I'd love to kick it off with my dear friend, Wendy Levy from the Alliance. And Wendy, you know, you've been such a force in this work for many years, and you've been doing it in your support of individual artists. You've been doing it in working with many of our media arts organizations, and also playing just this really important conduit role in working with government and other partners like universities. And I'm just wondering, you know, why do you do this work? What was your inspiration to really kind of try to tackle this piece of the industry?
You know, thanks so much, Paula. I'm Wendy Levy, a 60-ish woman with silver hair. I'm sitting in a room with a colorful media, a colorful poster behind me that is of the Alliance for Media Arts and Culture. I use she, her pronouns. You know, the reason, I mean, there's so many reasons why we started this work. But back, maybe it was 2017 or 2016, I was in DC for a meeting, I think convened by JAX and the National Endowment for the Arts, that was focused in the documentary space, and everyone was talking about sustainability, because there is that, you know, and I think it was before it was definitely before I started at the Alliance, or maybe I had just started at the Alliance. But I was taken by how deep our conversations were going, and how little we were actually doing to change things collectively, because change is hard. And when I started at the Alliance, I had this deep sense that as a national media arts service organization, that it was our remit to look. I had to stop acting like I was really working in the arts for individual artists, or that I was leading a community-based media arts organization. But our remit is to look at field-wide gaps and start to make the world better for community-based media organizations and media artists wanting to make change and wanting to make a living. And how could we do that? How should we do that? So I'm more comfortable talking about us than why other organizations maybe should do this. But this is about systems change for us, knowing that we can change, you know, youth media training the verbiage of it into creative workforce development if we want, but if we don't change the system that can enable young people and folks in community without college degrees in filmmaking to be able to move into the careers they dream about. If we don't look at it systemically, no change will happen. And this, and after Oscars So White and Me Too, the industry will revert back to the way they used to do things. And I think so I was really inspired by that sustainability conversation that we had to start accessing the millions and millions of dollars in the federal budget earmarked for workforce development in general, and specifically for apprenticeship that never went to the arts, and the media arts specifically, because we never had apprenticeable job pathways. So Arts to Work, our program, was really designed to change that piece of it. But beyond that, there was a conversation with Wynn Thomas, who is a very well-known production designer in Hollywood, works closely with Spike Lee. And he was one of our earliest mentors and advisors and guides to this work. And my co-founder, Christina Ortica, and I were on a call with him. And he's like, this is the one thing I have to say to you. And that is, training without a job is a broken promise. And that's been our kind of mantra since the beginning. And workforce development programs, we work with community-based organizations. And for us, that is the key, because workforce development, for any of the organizations that are working in it, they are centered, and community colleges are prioritized. And they have a high indirect rate, and they suck a lot of money out of workforce development grants. But it's my belief that everyone on this call who runs a community-based media arts organization is a creative workforce training center, and we based our program off of the amazing work that was already going on.
Thank you, Wendy. For other people running media arts organizations, when Wendy says things like high indirect rate, I know all of our ears are like perking up like, but thank you so much. And it's such a great way to kick off this conversation. I'd like to go over to Baldwin next. And first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for being here, Baldwin. You're in the middle of production and juggling, and I'm just so appreciative. You and I had a really interesting conversation the other day, and we were talking about this idea of scale. And I think also kind of piggybacking again on what, Wendy was just saying about systems change, we're talking about these major profound changes that need to happen in our industry to make equity-centered work and to make jobs going to people that they haven't gone to ever, right, in our sector. But we talked about scale in a different way, and I really appreciated your approach and your perspective, Baldwin. And I was wondering if you would share a little bit about how you think about kind of that dichotomy, if there is one, between supporting one young individual versus, kind of this idea that we have to really touch tons and tons of lives. Like, what should we be aiming for, and how do you think about that, Baldwin?
Yeah, thank you, Paula. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this conversation. So my name is Bound Suchek. I'm the co-executive director of YouthFX in Albany, New York. We're a regional and national organization that works with young people ages 10 to 24, teaching media arts and filmmaking. I use he, him pronouns, and I have a Black background. I'm an older looking dude now with this gray hair, and with the YouthFX logo, wearing a white t-shirt. So yeah, I mean, I think that, it's like, I feel like so many people are, when they think about scale, they think about numbers, and they think about kind of growing, kind of vertically. And I think for us at YouthFX, we really are committed to looking at a horizontal approach to scale and thinking about how do we provide our fellows in our workforce development programs specifically, but also this, applies to all of our students in all our programs across the ages, is how do we provide opportunities for them to not only learn the skills, be trained, have those opportunities, but then also to think about sustainability in a realistic way. I mean, I think, this came into real focus post-pandemic when you realize that there's so many, kind of a multiplicity of crises that folks are dealing with that were a lot more exacerbated by that. But then, you think about communities that are under-resourced and marginalized, and a lot of communities of color and indigenous communities, they haven't had these opportunities in the past. And so I think to just say, here's a training opportunity and then kind of send you off on your way is really kind of disingenuous and doesn't acknowledge, as Wendy pointed out, the incredible, systemic, challenges that a lot of folks are dealing with. And, and I do want to just say, Wendy has been an incredible mentor, ally, accomplice, and as the Alliance is a very key partner in our own Arts to Work program that we did this past year and a half, because we actually just finished the program at the beginning of this year and graduated 12 fellows. And so what we're trying to do is to say, what happens when you actually provide all these different resources, mental health, you acknowledge the fact that housing is really, very unstable for a lot of young people who are transitioning out of their homes into a quote unquote, adulthood and those kinds of, career pathways. So we provided a lot of those wraparound services. We've actually been working with a consultant, Dr. Caroline Sharkey, who's a professor at UAlbany, to develop a trauma-informed framework, for our organization so that we can address some of these challenges that come at us, which are just going to happen if you work in a place that you're inviting people to be creative and share themselves and share their stories, and then see that as a kind of bridge to them building sustained work as filmmakers, as video, videographers, as digital media artists. And I think that what we have found is that's been an incredible, way to really acknowledge, but also to support our fellows, because so many of them needed that. And we actually built in, twice a month check-ins with them, which was completely nothing to do with their artistic endeavors, but just their life. How are they doing? How are they kind of feeling? And then not only that, we provided monthly stipends, access to all the different softwares at no cost, a MacBook Pro. And then now what we've done post-fellowship is we have a very direct relationship with them. As a matter of fact, we ended up hiring one of our fellows as a full-time employee, and we have a production side to our organization called Rogue FX, where we're actually hiring them on our staff to do the production work with us and get paid as a way for them to build their reel, build their resume, and then also, again, learn and access all the different networks that we're part of, so that we're kind of leveraging, look, we're doing this work. Here are some young people we want to introduce you that are just starting out in the field. So for example, we might do a project with an organization, and then the next time we actually might say, well, this might be a project for you to do independently. Again, providing that bridge for them to just not just be a trainee, but to actually be working full time. And I think, the other thing I wanted to just bring into the picture is, I'm part of also the Documentary Accountability Working Group, which is, the acronym is DOG. And we do a lot of work around how are we thinking about filmmaking as an ethical, as a more kind of values-based, sustainable career, and not something that you feel like at the early stages of your career, you're put in these really difficult positions where you're being underpaid or you're being asked to do work for free. We hear this from so many of our young folks that we work with. Oh, they want me to do all this free work, and then they're just getting burnt out and they feel like, well, I don't want to work in this field if all it is about exploitative, sort of practices. And so, work with the Documentary Accountability Working Group, and then you see what's happening on a national scale with the writer's strike and the SAG strike. It's like people have had it, and people are really wanting to work in, places that care about them. And so for us to center that as a model in the fellowship and not to just kind of talk about it, but actually build it into the framework of the program is really critical. And I have to say it's paid off incredibly well. And Wendy, we haven't, updated in a while, but 8 of our 12 fellows actually are working full time in a field in work that they actually did the training for. And 4 of the other ones actually made a choice to not work full time because they want to freelance and do other things. So how do we support that as well? And so I think it's just important for folks who are doing this type of workforce programming to really kind of avoid the numbers game, because I think that is really a trap, and I think for us, it's like, I really believe that we work with a small group of people in a really deep and intentional way, that they themselves can then become centers of gravity in the community that draw other young people to them, and then potentially can become future trainees or work with them and kind of like learn from their peers. And so I think it's really, again, for us, it's an intentionality about the really long-term sustainability, rather than just saying, okay, we had 12 people, now let's start the next fellowship to get 12 more and keep kind of just building it that way. It's like, okay, we have 12, now we want to kind of work with them for a year and really make sure that they're on their way and they have a path that's really going to be sustainable and successful, and offer them the resources. We let them borrow cameras. We have a whole lending library of equipment. So again, for us,
Forever
it's really
relationship. Yep.
Exactly. It's long term. We don't want these, especially, I want to also just add that we're in a smaller media market. So I think the potentials for that are really a lot more kind of, realistic. I think sometimes when you're in the bigger cities, people just sort of go off and they're doing their thing. But for us, it's about building those relationships and making sure that they're long term.
So many things there. I just want to put a pin in a few things. Just that, encouraging and supporting young people to be their own centers of gravity. I think that's so powerful. And I love that concept. And also the fact that, you're hiring young and emerging folks to work within your own organization and projects that you might be supporting on. I know a lot of us do that. And that I think is one of those like kind of maybe untold things that I think our media arts industry does really well. I know we do that, our team at BAVC Media as well. And it's really important to us. And it's not always easy, like making that transition from a young participant in a program is very different than having to be responsible, and there's a lot of growth that happens in that realm. So just want to say that. Okay, I would like to pass it over to Sue, and I just want to say a special thanks to Sue, who's joining us from the mountains and came like very last minute to join us. And so thank you so much, Sue. And wide angle youth media, I definitely track what you all do, Sue, and you guys have some of the most comprehensive programming for youth in creative workforce development, and you're in Baltimore, and again, not in a media market, but not one of the biggest ones. And I just want to say huge props to you. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how you and your team think about program design. And one of the things that's challenging for us, I know, in the Bay Area is like, we're actually very much involved in the artistic side of supporting, creatives. And we're also involved in the much more bureaucratic administrative side of it, in our partnership with the city and other partners, which gets very wonky. And there's like a bit of like, or a lot of like translation of kind of verbiage and expectations and metrics and all those things gets really hard. I'm wondering if you have those challenges as you think about program design. So it's kind of a two-parter, like how do you approach program design kind of at go? And then how do you deal with like that translation part of it?
Well, thank you, Paula. It's an honor to be here today and in such great company. I'm Sue Malone. I go with she, her pronouns from Wide Angle Youth Media, and I'm a white woman working in communities of color. And it's really important that I start there because I've been working in Baltimore for over 20 years, and it's predominantly a Black and brown city. And our young people really wanted to move from being just in front of and behind the camera to really changing the way the landscape looked for employment in Baltimore. So I am a champion of that work, and all of our program design really starts with the idea that media inspires creativity and instills confidence, but really it helps young people navigate that pathway between school and education and career, right? And so when I first started in this work, we really were focused on how are we helping young people move out of high school, right? We were really focused on high school graduation. And we knew in Baltimore, you would make $1 million more. And then about 10 years into this journey, I was being mentored by Mike Wassenaar, who's on the call today from Alliance for Community Media. And we were talking a lot about how do you really make sure young people are able to move into career, and what does that look like? And how do you do that in a meaningful way while scaling your organization and doing that thoughtfully? Like Rowan says, talking about a trauma-informed approach, thinking about asset-based framing for our young people. And so when we think about our kind of programming now, we serve young people ages 10 through 18 through media education, right? So in middle school, you're learning about media, you're learning if that's an interest for you so you can move into a career pathway for high school. When you're in high school, you're really deepening your experience. And then when you transition at 18, you're being hired on staff as an intern, an apprentice, or a journey worker, meaning that you are moving into the field of media arts and communication, because we're really focused on making sure that that field in our community, in our region, is reflecting that full spectrum of our residents, particularly youth from minoritized and marginalized communities. So program design for me starts at the heart of what do young people want? What do they need? What are they asking for? What are the partners at the table, whether that's the Alliance bringing youth apprenticeship to the state of Maryland, bringing apprenticeship to the state of Maryland, and really thinking through how we're doing that work, or whether that's with the school system. So really understanding who your partners are. How does the funding mechanisms work in the area that you are in? So for us within workforce, you know, it might be workforce, it might be job training, but every different market, really understanding how it's being evaluated. Does it ring true to how you and your programs work, right? So like Bowen and I, we both work really intensely with a small group of young people when they're moving into that developing professional field, right? The numbers are really intensive training. I think it's a number of like 10,000 hours to be competent in the media field was the number we kept throwing around. And while our apprenticeship is 2,000 hours, it's really about building that over time with our young people so they can thrive and move into well-paying wages, right? And then when we think about, so you understand partnership, you understand funding, and you understand what young people want, and you'll create programming that really aligns to the best intentions for your community and making sure that you're partnering with others who are doing the work so that you can really advocate together for the people that you're serving.
Thank you, Sue. And thank you for the shout out to Mike Wassenaar and the Alliance for Community Media, for all the folks here that are joining in that are running community media centers. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure. And I think that, you know, the resources that community media centers provide, you know, piggyback on what Sue just said and what Bowen said, like the fact that we can provide access to cameras and to lighting kits and to all the things, like that's huge. It's an amazing way that we can subsidize the work. But speaking of money and funding, I did want to just go back to that a little bit. I think one of the challenges that we have in, you know, creative workforce development and kind of economic development is clearly like, you know, we want to pay all of our participants, particularly, you know, young people and emerging media makers who are coming from under-resourced situations. And it's really, really hard. You know, it's hard just let alone to fund the instructors and the mentors, but then when you were also paying for wages and, you know, we're paying for people to forego working in another job to participate in our programs to get the technical and creative skills, it gets very expensive very fast. So I just want to open that up and just free form style. What are your thoughts about how, you know, aside from using kind of our resources from community media and other sources like that, like how do we actually raise the money that it takes to invest in folks to be able to get these skills and experiences?
If I can jump in just for a quick, just from my bird's eye view point of view, there's a, you know, raising money for workforce development has been really interesting because when we started this whole thing, arts funders, our foundation partners, they weren't really thinking about workforce development. And when you go to, that's why we wanted to open up workforce development pathways and create eligibility for our participating organizations. But there is a built-in challenge. There is a lot of money in workforce pots that should be going to so many, and is going now to a lot of the organizations on this call. But I want to be honest about the kind of pain points that absolutely exist there. Because when Bowen was talking so eloquently about the centers of gravity, you know, for the trainees in workforce development, without a doubt, the center of gravity is employers. And they create programs and prioritize. You can't move anywhere unless your program has employers attached who are going to be willing to hire. And if you're going for apprenticeship money, they want people who will hire not just entry-level people the way they usually do, but will follow a registered apprenticeship pathway. For some people, we believe that that is one way to kind of change the system and make it more equitable. But in the long term, we want jobs for folks, and we want them to have the jobs that they want and that are the pathway. The funding piece becomes really challenging because it becomes more about data, you know, the data that we don't want to reduce our folks to. But when you apply for the big money, they want to see that how many people are you how many bodies got trained and placed in jobs, and it's exceedingly reductive. So we have to push back at each level. Something that the Alliance has realized is that for the larger pots of workforce development money, you need an infrastructure that is unmistakably robust and more robust than almost any of our organizations have. We ourselves that thought we could be the pass-through for a lot of this money, we don't have 3 full-time finance and compliance people, you know, that so that, and if those boxes are not checked off, those proposals get rejected. And so how do we subcontract? How do we create, you know, we're looking to create abundance and flows of money for the programs that we want to do the way we want to do them. And so that means what workforce people like to call braided funding or it just, you have to diversify it so that you're getting some government money, but it's not just hog tying you to a certain kind of deliverable that doesn't address your program, and then get some visionary foundation funding and look for those corporate funders who want to get a name on your studio, that want to support with so much in kind, and get them to freaking hire people out of that program. And that's
Wendy,
yeah.
I'm going to pause you just for a second because actually Dax has a great follow-up question for you. But before we go to that, I actually would love to hear from Sue and Baldwin. What does your back-end infrastructure look like? I know, you know, we have a BAVC, we have a few folks on our ops team and finance team, and they're like doing just like, you know, amazing work with, we have so many contracts and the very, very detailed information that has to be tracked and reported on in various different formats. I mean, it's excruciating. I'm just wondering, how do you all do it? And do you have any tips for everyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just speak to, our program was funded by the Department of Labor in New York State. And as Wendy said, there is a ton of money out there. And there's a lot of hoops to jump through. As a matter of fact, with our program, we had to basically teach them a model that they had not been introduced to, which is that we are actually wanting to pay our trainees and our fellows, and we want to actually be able to give them more sustainable opportunities afterwards. And so like we incorporated things like financial literacy trainings, and we actually partnered with our community loan fund, and the community loan fund came and spoke to the students. And because they met directly with one of the officers, the program officers of that organization, which is a nonprofit, you know, they were even eligible to apply for micro funding to do some kind of a startup, you know, project or build their LLC or whatever it may be. So I think part of what we're trying to do is to also build in ways that we can sort of collectively use resources so that it's not just all about money. And I think that's one thing too, is like what do our existing partnerships look like? And how do we always kind of thinking about pairing the young folks that are going through our fellowship programs with the partners and the networks that we have. But, you know, I think funding is always one of those things where, you know, you have to think about how are you able to kind of message and kind of teach people about what you're doing. Because I think the model that Arts to Work is really kind of, you know, bringing to the foreground is a new model that people are not familiar with. I mean, I think that we hear so many of these training programs, and people that are on our own, you know, students and fellows experiences where they go through a training and then it's like, all right, good, congratulations, here's your little certificate, and kind of keep it moving. And for us, it's like, we're trying to show the city, the state, you know, the federal government that what you're doing is building also a platform and a foundation for young people to transition into things like, you know, home ownership and, you know, contributing to their communities in a, you know, like in like the political way, or like, you know, being active in their communities as people who are engaged in storytelling. Because I think that's one of the other things is like, you know, we have to look at where we're at as a you know, country, as a world. Is like storytelling is a critical aspect of culture and a critical aspect, for example, of preserving even history. If you look at now, it's like history is being literally erased before our eyes, and there's all these incredible, you know, things that people are doing on a grassroots level to preserve and tell history. But that's part of storytelling. And I think that, you know, I think there's two things I'll say is that there's the money is out there, but we have to convince the people who have, you know, the sort of the gatekeepers, the people who hold those purse strings, that it's not just about, you know, a job. It's not just about that. It's also about like, what are we doing when we train media arts, you know, fellows? We're training people who are going to be folks who are bringing culture and arts into our communities. And I'll just say for upstate New York, for Albany, there's a severe lack of that. You know, outside of YouthFX and a couple of other organizations, there's not anybody else doing this kind of work. So what is the kind of value that you bring to a city, to a community, when you're saying, look, we're putting 12 young people out into the world who are going to be kind of like, continuing to talk about, important and relevant issues while also building a career that is something that can kind of pay them. They're providing, this incredible value to the community as cultural workers, so I think this is really important to make sure that that framing is part of the conversation as well.
Yes. Thank you, Bowen. Sue, did you want to jump in with anything on that? Oh, Sue is muted.
Oh,
Okay.
there we go. Okay, sorry, I couldn't unmute for a second. I have a lot to say on this, so I'm happy to talk to anybody about the funding side of this anytime. At White Angle, in 2014, we realized we wanted to develop a social enterprise, and that was our production for hire model. And we kind of did a test where we were trying to figure out how do we fit into the landscape of Baltimore to make sure that we were providing media services that others could not provide or were not providing. And that has now developed over the past 10 years to include photo, video, and design. We have 30 folks on staff, 16 of them are in our workforce development. We call them developing professionals. And of those, half are full-time. So we're talking about a 400,000 plus investment in youth wages for folks in the 18 to 24 bucket. And so that gets a lot of money really quickly, right? And Department of Labor was contributing, and thanks to Wendy for like helping us navigate that entire process. We would not be an apprenticeship without the Alliance for Media Arts and Culture. Because our young people really wanted this opportunity, right, to move into the field and to have jobs with us. But with that, the Department of Labor was putting in maybe 5%. So overall, like our revenue stream had to be strong from our social enterprise to support this. So we have more luck having funding on the kind of like training the trainer model. So our mentors and folks who are doing the training are getting paid through grant-based revenue. Department of Labor is kicking in some of the additional training that our young people need, plus a little bit of wage reimbursement. I mean, minor amounts, right? And if we were a for-profit business working in Baltimore, we would have much better subsidies on the Department of Labor side. But because we're a nonprofit organization, we raise that revenue through fee-for-service. We have about 30 clients a year. It brings in approximately 30% of our organizational budget. And we really use those revenues to support youth wages so that overall we're making sure that our mission and vision to center young people in this work is really, really happening on the ground. So that's kind of how we model the work that we do here at White Angle.
Wow. Okay. So basically we need to do a follow-up masterclass with Sue and Wendy and Baldwin about blended financing or funding for our programs that includes fee-for-service work, foundation grants, and also government and corporate in there too. So well done. I think we have a lot to learn. I would like to go back to Wendy and Jax's question. And Jax asked, Wendy, any tips for mobilizing big employers to vouch for the value of local film and media arts orgs and workforce development training? Oh, Wendy's muted.
Oh, there. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been that I like go to sleep thinking about that, and I wake up thinking about that. How to and not only, so it's a great question from Jax, but not only to mobilize them to vouch for the value of local film and media arts organizations in workforce, but to actually make a commitment to supporting and hiring out of those programs. And I think for a while we were working through production pipelines. And I was talking to every producer from every major, who do I know, who's at A24, who's at HBO, who's at Netflix, who's at Amazon, where can we plug in? Because if we get one exciting director who's got a 3-picture deal and they agree to hire apprentices, then we can kind of, and that is just, we're still doing that. It's very slow going, especially now with the strike. But what we did find is that we were getting the biggest kind of bang for our buck or the most alignment with in a visionary conversation when we went through corporate CSR and the DEIAB programs. And even though I push back because I don't want this work to look or feel like charity, this is to me essentially a way to do business. But we've had some great we have a developing relationship with NBC Universal that is modeling some of this work, because they came to us and was like, we've read about Arts to Work, we want to get involved. And they actually invited a dozen Alliance member organizations into a creative lab, impact lab program that they were doing, their program, and they were providing funding for those organizations to create content in their neighborhoods with other nonprofits, paying for it and providing not quite on the job learning experiences, but in proximity. It's like a stepping stone. Ultimately, of course, we'd love NBC Universal to be hiring out of the program directly, but I think it's been an indicator of the capacity of these corporate partners to, I think there's no problem getting them to support the work that we're doing. They love it. They hear about it. They see how centered we are in equity, and the not abandoning the practices that are trainee-based, community-based, trauma-informed, all of that. And they also can have an opportunity to kind of seed the quote-unquote pipeline. I mean, we see it more of an ecosystem, but like the work we're doing in Watts right now, we're actually working with a community-based media organization, that community-based organization that has the capacity for media arts training, but is not currently doing it. And they recently got a big grant from LA County to do Arts to Work, to build a media center. And that funding, we can leverage corporate and industry engagement with that, because they all want to be part of something that has this sense of hope and potential for next generation hiring. We hit trouble spots with unions, we hit trouble spots with HR departments, we hit trouble spots with legal. But if you bring in if for anyone who doesn't know their local workforce board yet, we can help introduce you. And those are important relationships for community-based media arts organizations, is to know their local workforce board, because they are the arbiters of cash from the federal government for all of this. And there's a relationship there. So corporate, government, they all kind of flow together, but that's my long answer to that question. Sorry about that.
No, thank you, Wendy. That was great. And I will say that for me, one of my learning curves as an executive director in this space is just feeling comfortable with going and getting meetings with local officials and, shaking hands and learning how to do that. Especially, I think I started in 2019 and then COVID hit. And, so there was a lot of lack of social connection. But that has started to really feel like I'm making some momentum in just like building relationships with people that can vouch for us as a media arts organization. We have a couple of questions and I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Dawn. But before I do that, I also just wanted to recognize that I know that even there are a lot of media arts organizations here today and in our field who don't necessarily have formal training programs per se, that's training and workforce development, maybe you don't call it that, but you're doing a ton of the training, and you're whether you are an art house, movie theater, or you're a community media organization, or documentary film, like we do it in a lot of ways. And I just wanted to honor that. I know a lot of us are doing that, and I think that more of us should talk about best practices and things like that. So hopefully that will be something that we do in this IMAG network. And Dawn, I'm going to pass to you with the questions.
Hi, sure. And I think these two questions kind of are connected, and I think you've given us so much great information. But one question from the Hyphens Film Center in Louisville, starting up, really using Baldwin's kind of framework of starting small, running these, working directly with filmmakers. How did you successfully communicate your goals when advisors and funders don't understand your vision? And let me add to that, because the other question was from John Van Wyck, which is really loving that idea, training without a job is a broken promise. And at the same time, some of these organizations are starting with not really any resources to do this work. So are there creative ways to kind of build these opportunities without necessarily financial incentives? I think they're connected because, right, it's starting small, doing that model, and then how do we do this without necessarily have the money happening yet, so that we can prove we've got, proof of concept, basically.
Mhm. One thing I just wanted to touch on that I think is related to that question is that I think it's also important to really kind of encourage the folks who are in our programs to make art, to make films, to create things and to work, because I think that sometimes it's like you're standing around waiting for things to kind of come or waiting for a job. It's like you could be making stuff, and I think that's why we really want to ensure that they have access to things like cameras and editing software and so on and so forth. So there's not those barriers to just making stuff before that's even for a job or for a client or whatever it may be. And I think that I'm really also interested in what one thing that YouthFX has really, fostered and built a lot is, supporting collectives and folks who are just like, 3 or 4 artists that have very like-minded approaches or are interested in the same topics to kind of work together so that they can build stuff. And then the other thing is, connecting them to people on more like at the beginning as contract basis so they can kind of see what their work is like, because often that'll lead people to then bring people on full time, as which has happened for 2 of our fellows, as a matter of fact. So I think that, being creative where you don't, I think when you're, we've at least had this experience where we're asking employers to commit to anything. They don't want to commit to anything, because they are also dealing with uncertain financial, scenarios and futures. And so I think for us, it's like, we want to start with also the fellows and like, what is your interest? Like, like the question of, I think that was posed years ago by the Alliance, by NAMAG, was what is your desired future? How do you want to kind of see yourself working in the space? So that I think I don't want to just funnel people. And I'm not somebody that's interested in just funneling you into a job. I want you to be thinking and thoughtful about what kind of job you want. And I think that is about relationship building, as you said, Wendy. And I think, Sue, you're touching on this too, with the work that you're doing. You're always thinking about these relationships and making that connection, because somewhere down the line, there might be something that sparks and it's like, oh, that person's a perfect fit. Like one of our fellows is the perfect fit for that opportunity. So another kind of like asset or aspect of bringing someone onto a production that we're doing is we're introducing them and pairing them up with people so that they can meet and they can say, oh, I worked with you. And that literally happened. We had one of my former students did a fiction film here over the summer last year. All of our fellows got hired on the production as PAs. Some of them ended up moving up within the production to art department PAs, camera PAs. And then one of our fellows just got hired for a 4-month producing role. Actually, she got promoted into a producing role right because of that connection. And so I think, again, it's like, how are you always seeing these opportunities as more about relationship building rather than kind of like transactional, opportunities? Because I think once you start thinking transactionally, we're all kind of falling back into this trap of, this capitalism mindset where you're just thinking about, well, I have to get this and then this, and it kind of like building your resume. Even it's more about, to me, building your relationships, and those can kind of lead to bigger opportunities.
What he said. Yes.
Dawn, did we have one more question? It looks like we might be able to squeeze in one more, or did you roll 2 into 1?
I rolled 2 into 1, but there's these other 2 questions that I think I can roll in together, which is kind of they're connected. One is about navigating music licensing for these kinds of productions, and also who owns the creative content, and especially when you're working with corporations or you're doing these kind of partnerships.
Can I speak to that real quick? We had an incredible partnership a couple of years ago with the Smithsonian where this came up, where they commissioned work from us. And now that we're working with NBC, it comes up. We don't do projects where the apprentices who are, if it's set up where they're not just assisting, but they're directing or in a lead creative role, where they don't have shared rights on to distribute and do what they want with that media. With the Smithsonian, we had to pull back the first 6 months of a museum exhibition. We couldn't do anything with the content that was created, the films that were made. But then after that, you work with the lawyers, you advocate, you make sure that the filmmakers are in on that process. So they're learning as they're going from, and not just a recipient of rights, but they become the advocates themselves. But it's like, we just don't do it unless they are sharing in all of those rights, and we must have that, period. And we absolutely advocate for people not entering into those kinds of relationships where, unless it's work for hire, and when they know it's work for hire and it's a learning moment about what that means, go for it. Then you're making work and you're turning it over. and you say goodbye to those rights. But, you know, if you're creating it and we're supporting it, then everyone's got to play that game.
Thank you so much. That was, and I wish we had more time, obviously, but we have come to the end of this session. Thank you all. And obviously, please share information in the chat and we'll be following up.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks,
again.
everybody.
Great. So I'm going to turn this over right now to our another lightning talk that we have going on with my colleagues at the Bay Area Media Maker Summit. Bianca and Lex, take it over.
Howdy, everyone. My name is Lex Sloan. I use she, they pronouns. I have graying hair, white skin, glasses, and I'm wearing a tracksuit.
Hi, I'm Bianca Beirudi, also with BAMS. I use she, her pronouns. I have olive skin and dark brown eyes and dark brown hair. We're coming to you from the KQED offices today, where BAVC is hosting this event. We're really thrilled to be here and tell you a bit more about Bay Area Media Maker Summit.
Yeah, this has been truly inspirational. So the Bay Area Media Maker Summit really owes so much to the South Summit, which was started by the New Orleans Film Society. It was really an inspiration, and I want to acknowledge all the work they've been doing and encourage everyone to check them out. You know, we really discovered, and we're both filmmakers, and we saw so many of our friends and colleagues leaving to New York and LA and these hubs. And we were sad to see them go. And we were like, what's going on with the Bay Area region? And that's kind of where the summit was formed. So the Bay Area, we really consider 7 different regions. San Francisco and Oakland often get a lot of the glory and celebration, but it stretches from the South Bay and San Jose and up into the North Bay. And so the Bay Area Media Maker Summit is a place where we're trying to bring together filmmakers from all of those regions.
And as we convened both fellow filmmakers and other arts organizers in 2021 to kick off this initiative, it was really important to us to survey the landscape. And so we did a series of surveys and focus groups, not only with filmmakers, but with arts organizers and other media organizations to really get a sense of what is it about the Bay Area film community that's so special, and what are the challenges and opportunities that are specific to our region that we can help address and better resource. So out of those fact-finding missions, we decided that it was really important for us as an organization to crowdsource the programming that we put on and really empower the community to tell us what's important to them and what kinds of resources and support they want to see. And you know, part of that is, you know, making sure that our programming is inclusive of filmmakers of all formats, narrative, documentary, experimental, and also spotlighting communities that are historically marginalized, and, you know, making them feel included and supported as well. And another important thing that came out of our fact finding was these themes that folks have also surfaced in their regions around sustainability and gatekeeping, and as Lex mentioned, like gentrification and the impact of that in our industry and communities. Yeah, so maybe you can tell a bit more about our first summit.
Yeah, so our first summit last year, one of the highlights, we had a lot of panels and programs and parties. One of the highlights was the festival funder fair. You can kind of imagine a big room that's kind of like a job fair with tables set up with film festivals and film funders, where filmmakers can go and media makers can go directly and talk to the programmers at festivals or the people with the money. So instead of elevating those folks and creating a space, it was really a place for connection and to address the issues of gatekeeping that we heard over and over.
Yeah, and that program was received really well. The community really got a lot of value out of that, and we're excited to be bringing it back this year with our second annual summit, which we're actually hosting this weekend in San Francisco and Oakland. We'll put links in the chat both for our programming this weekend, and another resource that we're really proud of is a progress report that we put out last year that sort of lays out the values and the data that we collected and formalized from our early formations, and really kind of offering that to the community as a guide for how we would like our programming community to be shaped going forward.
Yeah, and I know we're running low on time. We both actually met on set as assistant directors. So keeping to time, I think one of the things I've heard is like moving at the speed of trust and really living our values. Everyone who's involved in the summit, from the panelists to our volunteer crew members, get paid. We make sure that all of our venues are wheelchair ADA accessible and that we have accommodations for folks requesting them. The summit is free. No one is turned away for lack of funds, and we feed people, and everybody knows filmmakers and free food go hand in hand. So if you're in the Bay Area, we invite you to come to our summit this weekend. If you want to learn more about starting a summit in your region, we would be happy to chat more about what we've learned and what we have in store for the future.
And I'll also speak for both of us and say we've been learning so much from all of you and the work that you've been doing in your communities as well. So really excited to be here.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm actually super excited because I will get to be there tomorrow and the next day. Really excited to be with y'all. And for our last panel, we're really excited to talk about, this is called a case study, public broadcast as an incubator for local talent. And our moderator is Amy Miller from KQED. Really excited to have you. And our panelists are Stephen Gong, Nick Price, and Melissa Harmon. So we look forward to hearing what y'all have to say about public broadcast. Thank you for being here. Take it over, Amy.
All right, thank you, Dawn. Hello, everybody. This is Public Broadcast as an Incubator for Local Talent. And I'm Amy Miller. I'm the Director of Video Production and Finance at KQED. And I also happen to be an independent filmmaker. So I'm coming at this from a couple different perspectives. I'm a middle-aged woman with pinkish white skin and long brown hair and big brown glasses and blue eyes. And I'm wearing a white tank top. And I use she, her pronouns. So I just wanted to remind you that if you have questions for the panelists, you can put those questions in the Q&A and Dawn will surface them. And so today we are asking, how can organizations foster equitable partnerships between early career filmmakers and local public media stations? So how do we position public media to do a better job of connecting diverse, independent talent with public media's production resources and audiences? So in this session, we're going to do a case study of a successful project that has done just that. And hopefully we can explore how public media stations and media arts organizations can use this example as a model in their own regions. So we're going to start talking about the Hindsight Project, and we're going to start with Nick Price. So Nick, can you just tell us briefly, what is the Hindsight Project and how is Hindsight connected to the series that you are the series producer of, Real South?
Hi, Amy, and hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Just really quickly, I'm Nick Price. My pronouns are he, him. I am wearing a white linen shirt with a lot of sun cast half on my face. And I have a background that promotes Real South with a bunch of figure images of subjects from different films that we've released in this year. Hindsight is a series, a sort of sub-series within Real South. It's a series that in 2020, Real South alongside CAM, the Center for Asian American Media, Stephen, my colleague here, we're getting the show back together, it seems, along with Firelight Media, got together and pooled our resources, pooled a lot of our relationship building that we had been spent time over the last several years prior to 2020 cultivating, and realized that what we wanted to do didn't exist at the time. What we wanted to do was further amplify and empower makers of color from the American South, oftentimes who are marginalized in terms of the stories that they can tell or have the access to tell, and give them the resources they needed to do that, to tell stories from our communities in the American South that were, constantly being shown on national news for the various reasons that all of our communities were seeing across 2020, be it the pandemic, be it the racial reckoning after George Floyd's murder, the economic, the political, all of these sort of crises that were converging. The South, we felt, was representative of, and we wanted to find ways to take ownership of those stories and allow makers from those communities to really be a central voice and lens in which to view those. And so that's the content of Hindsight. These are short documentaries, but ultimately what we also wanted to create was a new model that really united our public media sort of alliances and focus to really create a way that stations alongside, a series alongside media organizations to really come together and do something that was timely, do something that was urgent, but also do something that was unique in the system, and really also show that public media is a place not just for career sustainability, but also for experimentation, and a place where we are able to really pilot new ways to tell stories and also work across a region. Stephen, maybe you want to round out that discussion about Hindsight, or at least the makings and the sort of goals of it.
Thank you, Nick. I was having trouble unmuting, but that's exactly what I was going to ask. Thank you.
Stepping on, I wondered if I'd missed my mark. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you, Amy. Nice to join you all. My name is Stephen Gong. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Asian American Media in San Francisco. I am a senior Chinese American with gray hair, horn-rimmed glasses. That comes with the package. And I'm speaking to you in front of a blurred background in an office in San Francisco, Chinatown. You know, for us, to take one step back, our participation in the homegrown collaboration actually began as our own regional initiative, sort of within a year of Trump stealing the election to become president. I can't even finish that sentence, but what we saw as the country was sliding further into polarization was the division in so many people, including, you know, close family members, you know, writing off red states or just feeling like half of this country had gone completely mad. And maybe that's so, but we felt in our work, what could we do to try to build bridges or to not follow that playbook? And one of them is for us, it's always trying to push back against stereotypes. And among the stereotypes about Asian Americans is that we all live on the coasts in large urban centers, right? Like Boston, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle. And we know of the complexity and diversity in our own communities, that a representative proportion of the Asian American population lives in the American South. And yet that is not so much thought of even in our own communities or in the broader American public. So that was the impetus for us. And I have been calling that initiative Complicating Narratives, so that even the American South narrative is not just a black and white narrative, right? It's incredibly diverse. So, you know, to summarize quickly, naturally we had gotten to know the real South folks and started conversations, say, hey, can you help us do something? And the idea was similar to what Nick was saying for us, which is not just to identify Asian American filmmakers, but to try to help them tell their own stories, digital shorts, look towards something that could connect with local PBS stations and the network of independent film in the South, including film festivals, you know, as well as organizations like Novak in New Orleans and the New Orleans Film Festival. And then it grew because Firelight came in, and it turns out they had been, they've been holding a series of incredible workshops around the country, and that they already had their own networks of diverse makers and had put together this project, which would become Hindsight, and they were gracious enough to let us in on that. So the core partnership was Real South, CAM, and Firelight in this case, and I think those were the combined aims. So this is very important because we're located in San Francisco, and we know one of the ethical dangers in our field is to parachute into a region, right, or a community, do your little thing, and then you're gone. And so for us, it's always also been about how do you strengthen and connect networks that are already there. So one of the things we recognize at CAM is that a lot of our work is in terms of public media, and there's much more to say here, but I'll just start by saying, we've been at this work for over 40 years. Public broadcasting, like so many entities inside our society and our culture, they're not perfect. The economic system we work in mitigates against, in some ways, the types of society we want to build. But there are changes. There are people like Sylvia Bug at PBS and like Catherine Washington at CPB, and there are many, many good people throughout the system, and that's what we found. So the long and short is there are people, not at all of the stations, but there are really good people at each of the stations. And as someone who's been in this field, 50 years, you can't give up on it. And I think we are on the cusp of, I think the fact is we couldn't have done a series like this 20 years ago. There just would not have been the interest in the system. But I think things can happen now. So, it's a more hopeful one, and then maybe we can talk about how we build on an experience like the Hindsight project and the work we want to do regionally. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm curious how many public media stations is Hindsight being distributed at right now?
That's a Nick question.
Sorry, I can't unmute myself. So I will not mute myself anymore. So Hindsight is, it's interesting. We worked with 5 stations to produce the content from pre-production through post. They worked in engagement, they worked in impact, they worked from selecting the process. And I'd love to go to Melissa Harmon, who was one of the key figures at a station that was involved in Hindsight in our first iteration. But Hindsight is also, as regionally as it is focused on the content and the makers and the production, it's also a national series. And that's what the benefit of working with PBS and being able to sort of string together a national footprint for this series is that stations all over the country, not just in the American South and the stations that make it, but also everywhere from California to New York to the Midwest, are able to see these stories and really identify with the themes of the content despite the geography, or because of the geography as well.
Great. And Melissa, yeah, I would love to hear from you and tell us a little bit about your experience with the Hindsight project at South Florida PBS.
Great. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Harmon. I'm with South Florida PBS. I'm a middle-aged white woman with dark brown shoulder-length hair, and I'm wearing a gray V-neck shirt. At South Florida PBS, we came into this project through our connection with Firelight. We had hosted a workshop for them as they were preparing and sort of growing into that next evolution to create Hindsight. And it was a really great experience for us at the time to host that workshop of, I think we had about 30 filmmakers come from across the country, and we got to play host station for one of the evenings and bring together a lovely panel to talk about film and working with public media and film. So when they brought us in, we met with the filmmaker Arlene Cruz Alicia, and she is in Puerto Rico. So it was a really fabulous thing for us to remind folks that Southern stories are not just your cousin on the front porch. Southern stories are so many things, and we live that every day in South Florida. So it was a really wonderful experience to work with Arlene on helping shape her story, and then to be a part of the overall project. Sort of each of the stations kind of took on a role. We helped with creating some of the online events. This was when this first was coming about. The films were first airing. It was late 2020, early 2021. So there was many things were online. There wasn't a lot of in-person things going on at the time. So we helped market, our folks helped create the marketing materials and collateral, and help create some of the thinking around how to host those events. So it was a really great experience for us, and it helped build on the filmmaking work we've been doing at South Florida PBS and in the rich Miami, South Florida community of filmmaking.
Let's talk a little bit about funding. I definitely, coming from public media, I'm always thinking about, like, how can I get my station to agree to fund something like this? But first of all, how did you, who put forward the initial funding?
I'll just jump in and say that this was funded both by Real South, CAM, and Firelight. But I think within that model is also Real South's kind of unique funding within the PBS system. We are actually the only series of documentaries, sort of anthology series, that is funded by stations across the South, almost exclusively. We are able to add underwriters and sometimes some co-production funds, like with CAM, who's generously supported Real South's work and across different content themes that we're doing, as well as other NMCA groups, as well as the NEA, which has supported Real South since its very beginning. But the stations themselves have sought and seen value in what Real South has been able to do across the system, to be able to connect the stations to their local communities, to filmmakers, and sort of create this reciprocity within the system where they're funding Real South, but Real South is giving back to their filmmakers who are local, who are also then making their next work and also building connections to local stations, and oftentimes thinking about the next project and thinking about maybe the next work that they can do locally, even if it's not a Real South project, but something they can do at that station, and try to create these levels of this web of public television and public media making between independent makers and the station and any other organizations that want to come in and support that effort too.
Thank you. And I'll just add that the Media Arts program at the NEA helps support this effort, as well as the Wyncote Foundation. And yes, the ethos was that each partner, brings some resources. And what was most remarkable, in a way, that we did this all right in the middle of the pandemic. And, there were just so many hours of Zoom meetings, really in deep collaboration about every aspect, about looking at cuts and providing feedback. And, my effort was, as I had promised, the Wyncote Foundation was this kind of new model, was to create the opportunity, ideally, the model for independent filmmakers being able to reflect their own lived experiences within their communities, within their region, and stay there. And so that there could be further partnerships. And that's why it was so important that we felt, as we're identifying, and several of the filmmakers we worked with it was kind of like their first major project or first significant project, but then to plug them in, right? Then to have them understand the distribution choices and what rights were out there, and what it was like to prepare for panels, and then to be at the film festival premieres, just things like that to strengthen the field.
Yeah, and I would just want to say, part of the success in just finding filmmakers and the work that goes into really, kickstarting this project is also not, Real South isn't always the one with the information and bringing things to stations. Stations like Melissa's have been doing the work within their communities to create and to work and network with emerging talent and emerging makers at very young ages. And I know that hopefully Melissa can speak to that a bit on this panel too.
Sure. We have a program called Filmmaker. It was an NEA funded project that we started 5 seasons ago. Through this project, we have brought over 100 locally created films from filmmakers of all ages. I think our youngest filmmaker was in season 5, was 14 and did an amazing film. And our oldest filmmaker was in their 70s. So we've had filmmakers of all ages and stages of career take place in this program or take part in this program. And the way it works is that it's free to enter. It just has to have been created in South Florida within the last 2 years. We have it judged by a panel of working filmmakers, film professors, and local film purveyors, talents, folks like that at local film societies and or movie organizations. So they help us with the judging on this. Some of our documentary films have gone on that have aired as part of the project have gone on to win Emmys. And I know we even have one of the Emmy-winning filmmakers on this call right now, Kathleen Dean out of Broward County. So it's just really exciting for us to have worked with all of these filmmakers. So many of them have come back around throughout the seasons and come back with great work, and it's fantastic to see them progress through their careers. A couple of our filmmakers are in the process of going on to bigger and better things. They've gotten into some apprenticeship programs in Los Angeles with HBO, and so it's really exciting. And one of the most exciting things about the program to me is that it has been a mirror of our community, of our very diverse community. The films have been, were created by over half were created by women. And I would say 60% were created by BIPOC filmmakers. So that's really fantastic to see that that's the reflection. That's who's in our community. That's who's making films. That's who wants to have their story shared on public television. And to be able to do that with our local filmmakers and to share those works nationally, because we also distribute the films nationally, has been really fantastic. And this summer, we have been working with high school students. And so we've got 5 filmmakers, high school filmmakers, they've created fantastic screenplays. We have 1 documentary and 4 screenplays, but great progress there. So the work.
Melissa, do you broadcast all of the films and do you also do digital distribution? Is it Hindsight branded series?
No, the series is branded under Filmmaker. That's the name of our project. But we do distribute nationally via NIDA, and we have aired all of the films locally, and they get multiple airings on South Florida PBS across both Channel 2, WPBT2 in Miami, and Channel 42, WXCL in the Palm Beaches. So
Can anyone speak to how audiences have responded to this content, to these films?
We get really nice response from it. I get a lot of input. And I think some of the funnest input comes from the filmmakers themselves saying, telling us and relaying stories about how people have come out of the woodwork to say, oh my God, I saw your film. Wait, I turned on the TV and there you were. And just to hear those stories of having that moment of they got to share their work on such a large platform. It's really heartwarming.
Well, so you created this model, so I'm very curious about like what resources are available to media arts groups and public media stations, to duplicate or scale this model. Have you got some kind of report or resources for for those of us who are interested in doing something like this?
You know, we have not written up a report other than to report back to the NEA on our progress with our grants. But we have been talking about that, and with our filmmaker Flip the Script, our junior program this summer, we do have plans to share that with PBS Learning Media. So that's going to be, it'll have a step-by-step, the working with the screenwriting workshop, and the next phase spelled out in it. So we're looking forward to that. And I love the idea of trying to scale filmmaker regionally. I think it'd be great.
Maybe if Nick could speak to the different levels of response, both to streaming as well as the broadcast of the Hindsight series, and then to there was regional, but that was both regional broadcast and then national. And then I would love to circle back and then talk about some other aspects of the reaction and the one that we had hoped for within the public media community and the stations, and that might be another aspect. So there's an audience, and then there's the system, as it were. But I think the proper level next might be Nick's.
Sure, and I don't have those data figures in front of me, but I think the best way to frame it is really around sort of a robust distribution model specifically around Hindsight, which again is just 6 for the first iteration. We have continued on, Real South has on a second iteration of that series, but the first iteration what we are talking about here really has this robust distribution model where we're premiering these films at prestigious film festivals that are regionally focused as well, then bringing them to YouTube and different models on the World Channel's YouTube channel page, as well as broadcast, as well as Real South's own platform. So what we're looking at is like tapping into the various different places that different audiences live, whether it's local community engagement screenings where the turnout is ranged from, your sort of niche festival audience that turns out on a Monday night of, 30 to 40, 50 people, to impact engaged screening events, held locally at, just a random conference room at a university. And then looking at just the numbers on YouTube as well, and being able to track the data as those grow and see the certain life cycle and see what that does. And there's strong data numbers. I would say the Hindsight figure are certainly some of the best streaming numbers from Real South, especially as they had a very long shelf life in terms of distribution. It was a really long footprint. Oftentimes, especially in these broadcast films, when we premiere a feature length or a short, they're getting, very short windows of immediacy of reaction online and streaming, and I think that applies across the board for most of PBS's content. You get a few days of a couple of weeks of really strong initial reach, and then it's 2 years away. I think with Hindsight, we were able to really build out a really long runway and build off different on-ramps and off-ramps for audiences to engage this content. And that's through film festivals, again, through different community engagements, through YouTube, which is ongoing, through broadcast and different avenues as well.
Thank you. And then I'll add, so our notion as a model, what we built into the project as we moved along was to have multiple panels within the system talking about this as a model. And, we selected kind of NITA, as our partner in this, because they've been known for the entities within public media. They provide services to many other entities within the system. And one of the things they do is they serve as the sort of secretariat for an organization called OSB, which is the Organization of State Broadcasting Entities. And these tend to be the smaller stations regionally located. As you may know, there are super stations like WGBH and WIDA and WNYC. Is that the right? No, whatever the New York station. But these smaller stations and regionally located, they were really the targets for the presentations we would do at these at their conferences. And I would just say part of the, what we are trying to identify are those stations that have a history of working with independent films, much like Melissa's station, which is so well known for that. And I think part of the proof is that right now, Firelight and CAM are finishing a Midwest regional initiative called Homegrown. We love these associated titles. And we have found the station interest in the Midwest very strong. And I think a number of the people we're working with definitely, heard our initial presentations. And they also saw this as part of a way that they could do something fresh, do something that they would not have undertaken if there aren't other organizations willing to get into deep collaboration. So that's the part we played. And then, just for us at CAM, I mean, we wanted to bring our other multicultural alliance partners in to sort of say, this is the future of the way we can work, which is not just trying to fight for a slot in POV or independent lens, but indeed to expand the footprint of how public media can serve independent makers and the American public. And so part of that is we need to continue to support Real South, and we're happy to do that because they're fabulous people. They are, if you want someone ongoing to look after work and you are in the American South, work with Real South.
All right, big question. And I'd love to hear from, all of you about this, but what do you think public media's primary obligation is to independent media artists, especially those from historically marginalized communities? So yeah, what are their primary obligations?
Well, just as someone who oversees the local storytelling at South Florida PBS and works with both our own programming and works with local filmmakers, I really take this on as a duty to find other voices, because we know that certain experts have been called on for years and years and years and years, and there are plenty of experts in the room, and it's my duty to seek out all of them and to seek out other voices that don't get to share and don't get the spotlight, but have the same education, credibility, have the same expertise. It's an obligation, I feel. And I feel like I get the support from my station in feeling that way and programming in that way.
Nick, how about you?
I have a very unique position in all of this, mostly working with Real South on this series, but that involves working with a lot of different stations who have a lot of different goals and a lot of different demographics and communities and what they're serving. I think public broadcasting and public media, I think, staying true to the model that it's really focused on its community, and I think it's important to realize that independent artists are big voices within that community, but they're not every voice either. And so I think that it's important to also be challenging and thinking about ways to innovate. And that's what I would love to see public media do more of. And it's, there's a content realm to that. There's, working with new voices, bringing new voices in, creative minds that can help reinvigorate what you're doing or spark new ideas. But I also think there's things even beyond a content realm that stations can and look at doing that involve just innovating how they work within their community. And that's, bringing virtual events and bringing virtual engagement into this space where you're really stepping out and expanding the boundaries in which you sort of are easily approaching your audiences, especially if you're a statewide agency. Or even thinking about how you're, using your physical space as a place to unify and bring community together. I think Stephen started this conversation, or at least his portion of it, talking about the polarization of this community. And I do think that, from PBS at a national level, there's a lot of work thinking about democracy and thinking about their place as a sort of truth teller within this country. But I think that, what's often not connected is the local elements to that foundation. I think we see that in the way we talk about politics in every sphere. I think public media and our local stations are an incredible sort of alleyway into thinking about these big tent issues, but doing so from a place where I think it's really safe for people to come and think about, okay, this isn't some place where I can detach myself from a conversation. It's about my community. And I think Hindsight allowed us to do that in a content way. I think Real South allows filmmakers and brings new voices into PBS land, but also helps keep them working and finds ways to sort of keep sparking the economy in that way. But it also, I think public media broadly can do a lot more and think about innovation in a way that is hyper local.
And if I could, yes, I mean, in a sense, the three of us represent sort of different parts of public media, and there are many other parts that are not represented here. But what I would want to share is a perspective. I think it will resonate with us all that, you know, we're at an inflection point in this country, and the unimaginable things have happened, and the pandemic is metaphoric as well as very real. And out of such disruption and catastrophe, you know, something and so much at stake, we have to build something back better. And I'd like to think that all of us, you know, whether or not you're a citizen or a resident, we are residents of this planet, and there is so much work to do. And public media is just one of those entities. I would like to dispel the notion that it, you know, that it can never change. It's changing right now, and we need to call upon and make alliances, renewed alliances everywhere. No one has all of the resources. There are. We know they're concentrated in some really dark places. So all we have is our innovation, is our morals, our ethics, and our aspirations. So I loved what Nick was saying about innovation. I think there are really good people in the system. There has been a big change, and I'm about to step off of the stage, but there, you know, what I saw was that there are really great people inside the stations. I mean, you can just see that from Melissa, that want to build and create things. So I don't think we should bring the same dichotomy of independent films on one side and the system that does not pay attention. There's a greater diversity inside the system, and I think there's an understanding that we have a real national asset that we have to protect. You know, what's the trusted news source in this country? It is so devastating what Fox News has done to this country. And I would say, you know, NPR and PBS are such great assets. So this edge of it, to bring more people. So if you are serving new makers in areas, try to find those good people and innovate. You know, it's not about just saying, you know, give me money, I deserve to have my voice. Assume that they also feel it is an important asset. You do have something unique to share, and dream up the ways that you spark conversations based on your work in each of these small towns. We won't come together as a country if we demonize the other, and of course the demonization will go on. But until, you know, Asian Americans are seen as neighbors in all of these communities, we will continue to be seen as perpetual foreigners. That's the way we view it at CAM.
Bringing it back to the Hindsight Project, thank you for those really thoughtful responses. Is the Hindsight Project a replicable model? And what would you change if you were to do this all over again? And what's different about the newest iteration of Hindsight from the original?
Great question. I think in public media, everything has to be scalable. I think that's something we probably all learned, that we don't all have the same budgets, even between homegrown Stephen and Camden Firelight's sort of evolution of Hindsight, bringing that to the Midwest. The budgets are very different from what we're doing in our own second iteration of Hindsight, still rooted in the American South, working in different states, different stations. I do think replicable. I do think that the content can get even better. I think there's more voices out there that are interested. And I would just say that, because I saw some questions too from Jax and others in the chat thinking about, how do independents engage with stations, and how do they, approach to think about regional initiatives or even getting their work seen? I think ultimately, and I think this applies across most documentary makers and conversations, I do think collaboration and having a collaborative spirit is critically important. I think so many conversations they're centered around something I create or something that I want to do, but I do think that the real spirit of public media is in collaboration. And I think that's where our success is. And I think Hindsight is replicable because of that. I think we want to work with stations. We want to get out of our kitchen tables, our one bedroom apartments, our studios. We want to get out of our offices and we want to connect with other people. And that's around a project, that's around different engagement activities. I do think, the themes that Hindsight was created are still something that we're doing across, and stations are doing, but I think certainly anyone can do this work. Funding, of course, is out there, but I think building relationships and starting small, I think that's another important component to public media's work, is that we don't have the largest budgets, but sometimes we do have a little bit more time. Sometimes we do iterate, we do things smaller. We know we're invested and we're here for the long run. And so I think, as we pinch pennies and fight for dollars in ways like many of our other nonprofit organizations and arts organizations are doing, we're thinking about the long run and the long runway in which we're trying to create and tell stories. And so it's, we don't have the big budgets to support that, of a short documentary, but we think about what we can do for the next one too.
I did want to just check in. We have a few more minutes, check in with Dawn to see if there are any questions in the chat that you want.
Hi. Yeah, there was a couple of questions. There were some questions also in the chat, but I think that they got asked, and kind of responded to. I'll just say it so that people can go and look in the chat, basically how to approach your local PBS station and some best practices about that. And Melissa, you did a great job answering that, but I think there are other people, who might want to answer. I mean, one of it is obviously pick up the phone, go and find out who they are. Another question that was in this was, where can people find these films that you're talking about? Is there a way for people to access them? What an amazing program, both Hindsight and now Homegrown coming online, and also Filmmaker in South Florida. So yeah, I think people would love to know that if you want to answer or put it in the chat. And then there's another question here. I'll let you do that first. Go for it.
Sure. All of our films are streaming on the PBS app, on realsouth.org, on YouTube, especially around Hindsight on YouTube. And I know that, we're a multi-platform series. You'll also catch things potentially on broadcast in your local area. Yeah, we're trying to be in many places all at once.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, and please, we'll make sure that we share that. One of the questions has to do with looking at sector expansions, film for radio producers, sports, politics, other kinds of media. And I will share this because it's afropop.org with Sean Barlow, and I'll just put it in the general chat because that's some exciting stuff that's going on. So other mediums, other platforms.
You know what, there is so much that we could, will be the subject, I think, for future gatherings. So I actually want to thank you all at BAVC for putting together this wonderful program and inviting us. I apologize if it seems like there's so few of us going over the same material. If Chloe were here from Firelight, if she weren't having networking problems, she would be so brilliant here, and it would have diversified everything a lot more. But I would just, there's so much work that needs to happen, and yeah, this is its own unique gathering. But I think we have to feel and understand that we are connected In the alternative media arts field, we've always been connected to so many other types of communities and efforts. And the idea isn't to, to narrow it or try to figure out how the one part of a sector of the field does it all. But yeah, I loved actually what Nick said too. It's where are the opportunities for collaborations where you're willing to work really, really hard to ensure that that collaboration works well, and with entities that you haven't worked with before, because that's what we really need to be doing, is to expand the connectivity between different kinds of communities and networks. I think for the greater, common good.
Good. Thank you all so much. This has been really enlightening. And obviously we have a lot more to talk about, but we are at time. So I'm going to hand this back over. Thank you to BAVC for putting together this panel and this whole session. This has been great.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks, Amy, for moderating, and thanks to the panelists. You're amazing. And I definitely have so much that I'm thinking about. There was definitely a shout out to Color Congress, an organization that's supporting media organizations run by BIPOC communities. We're doing a closing. Brittany said this was going to go by really fast. It went by really fast. And I'm like, whew, can we process some of that information that we just got? I know I was taking a lot of notes. Thank you for everybody putting your comments in the chat. Just as follow-up, we are, this is a partnership between BAVC and the NEA. Where our next meeting will be in late fall. We'll send you dates soon. I think you should all be registered on the IMAG page. If you're not, please do that. Make sure that you're registered so that you get the notes from this, the recording from this meeting, the chats from this meeting, all of the great data and information. The names of our panelists were on the agenda, but please feel free to check that out as well. We would love it. We will be hearing from folks working in the intersection of media, arts, and science at the next session. And please reach out to us if you have any ideas. You want to pitch a session to us or have ideas. Brittany and I will put our email addresses in the chat. Really want to thank all of our panelists, all of our moderators. What an incredible group of people sharing your thoughts for our lightning flash talks and talkbacks. Those were pretty amazing too. And then I just want to do some really big thank yous. Our ASL interpreters, Christine and Janelle, you all are amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks to the captioners too. And I didn't catch their names, but they're incredible keeping the captions. We want to thank everyone at the NEA. This has been such a joy to put this together. Thank you to the people who did watch parties. And for next time, if you want to do a watch party, please send us a note, because people who did watch parties got money to eat some yummy food together. So we'd love to do that. And really deep thank yous to our BAVC and KQED crew here, because honestly, we really couldn't have done this without them. We had so many tech things that we needed to figure out, and including all kinds of other things behind the scenes that happened. So we're super grateful, and just, grateful to all of you. You are all doing this really deep, important work. And I am, I'm choked up because I see the world as I would hope it to be. And you all are creating that for the people in your communities. So thank you. Sorry, I'm a crybaby. What can I say? You're the best. Thank you. Please put your information in, share your information. Let me put my stuff in here. And we'll see you next time, and we'll send you the date. And I think that's it. I think we're out. Bye.